Here. Here.
All right, welcome everyone. We're looking at MSA September 19th, 2022 workshop. So we have here tonight Kristen Schaefer from Ratway going to help us together with data practices training, and we also called it in our agenda data privacy. I know last time our board got a lot out of it. We actually tried to keep it back a bit, so we'll try to keep it close to an hour or maybe just a little bit over. So
That's fine. I don't have to be anywhere till 8 o'clock, and it's just the other side of the metro, so
okay,
probably 7 at the latest.
okay.
But thank you for having me back on this. Data practices, it's of course something that, I'm trying to ignore the camera, of course something that affects everything we do at the school. It's something that I think every school board member at every school I represent and every employee at every school I represent should know more about. I was actually out with some of my wife's book club friends, and turns out one of them is a school employee, and mentioned the data practices. Actually, like to do training in that, so I'm glad that you're taking the yes, I do the initiative to do this. It's kind of an easy way to get into a lawsuit, not following it, an easy way to stay out of one. It's low-hanging claims, so there's a lot here. And sometimes it's not palatable for people who want to hear some of the answers. Because a lot of what I'm going to tell you is no, you can't tell a parent that, no, you can't tell a student that, or no, a teacher doesn't get to see that. So with that being said, it can be a little unpalatable sometimes, but it's all because of the law. So without further ado, just following along on the handout that covers all the major points, I'm really talking about two statutes today. I'm talking about FERPA, which is the federal statute, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. FERPA only involves records on a student, an educational record, or an education record. A student is effectively anything that you maintain because the student is or was a student here. It's everything from grades to discipline to surveillance videos to agreements, contracts signed by the students' parents, things like that. These are all covered by FERPA. IDEA is mentioned, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It has a few provisions about data. For the most part, they get rolled into FERPA, and the big statute I want to talk about, the Data Practices Act, the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, which is a state statute. The first two were federal. So in general, compliance with the Data Practices Act is also compliance with FERPA and is compliance with the IDEA data provisions. For the most part, there are a few different provisions that may come up. The Pupil Fair Dismissal Act also has a provision about data when parents get to see data before an expulsion hearing, things like that. But really, the big ones we're talking about are the Data Practices Act and FERPA. So the first definition on page 2 of the materials, the definition of government data. This is a very comprehensive definition. It's also a very old definition. If you read the definition of government data in 13.02, it mentions electronic tape recordings. So, you know, the big electric tape. But it means any data that is collected, created, received, maintained, disseminated by, in this case, the school. So you're a government organization, you're subject to the Data Practices Act. Anything that is recorded in any physical medium that the school maintains, receives, collected, created, etc., is government data. And what that means is it's subject to the Government Data Practices Act, which means either it has to be disclosed in certain circumstances or it can't be disclosed in certain circumstances. And we'll get in there just a little bit, what those circumstances are. I do now, of course, notice a typo in number 2, so if we'd all correct this with me, it's 13, I'm sorry, no, that is correct. It's the records retention statute. It's also a statute we have to talk about. So number 2, we're talking about chapter 13, we're talking about the Data Practices Act. Number 2 on page 2, Arabic numeral 2, talks about government records under the records retention statute. That is chapter 138. And that is a record that is created in the transaction of public business. This is a subset of government data. These are records that the board had. So if it goes into a board decision, it is a government record, but it's also government data. So if I send an email saying that my daughter is going to be late to school, that's government data. It doesn't go to the school board meeting. It doesn't need to be held as government records under the records retention statute. The principal can delete it whenever in accordance with their policy about deleting things. On the other hand, if I send an email and it gets brought up to the board discussion, it's about my, candidacy for board or our contract with the law firm or something like that, and it's something that the board talks about, it becomes a government record and needs to be saved differently. So that is a subtle-ish distinction. All records are data, not all data are records. But for the sake of completeness. One thing here to keep in mind, this number 3 on page 2, in order for something to be data under the Data Practices Act or to be a record under FERPA or a record under the records retention statute, it has to be recorded in some form. Unrecorded mental impressions are not data. They are not subject to the Data Practices Act. And I mention it in greater detail later on, but the next point, nothing in the Data Practices Act or any of these laws that we were talking about requires a government actor or an employee of the district or the school or the school board or anything like that to answer a question. You don't have to answer a question under this law. You have to provide data. So if a parent says, I'm going to reach back a couple of years to masks, because, right, we're all, I'm sure, loving talking about mask policies still. If somebody asks, why didn't you have a mask policy that covered X? You don't have to answer that under the Data Practices Act. You may want to as a matter of general policy. It may be a good idea to answer that question. But what I would say is, if I didn't want to answer the question, the Data Practices Act does not obligate the school to answer this question. To the extent that you are requesting data about our mask policy, here is the data that's public and is available for you. So you can't sort of ignore the data privacy or the data practices aspect of it, but that's one example. The other example I get a lot of is in custody disputes, and I do have quite a bit about those later, I think. But parent A, and I'll waffle between mom and dad in my examples, so I'll try to stick to A and B. Parent A wants a teacher, a social worker, a principal to write up everything that their student looks like on Mondays when they get home from parent B's house. You don't have to do that. No, And in fact, some schools have a policy prohibiting staff from doing that. I don't know if you do. I recommend it. It's a great way to keep staff out of the middle of a dispute they really have no business being in. So it gives them something to fall back on, so they're not just saying, I don't want to answer that question. It's, I actually can't answer that question. Move the pressure up a little higher. But that's perfectly legal. The Data Practices Act doesn't require the school to create records. Now, if the parent asks for all social worker notes where parent B is referenced, well, that might be data on parent B, so my example gets us further down the road, but that is government data. That's a fair request. Some of it might have to be redacted, and I'll get there. All right, the Data Practices Act. Any questions on what is data? Sorry, usually I have a lot of jokes, but since I'm being broadcast, I won't do my stand-up routine. But my filler material is truly terrible jokes. I'm very proud of one of my partners. He had a free-range pun today in the Skyway to the point where a passerby stopped and just said, no, that was weak. And then we argued in the elevator on the way back whether his pun was weak or in fact funny. I'm on team funny. But in any event, to avoid hearing my jokes and to maximize the time that we have together, if you have questions, raise a hand, cut me off, whatever. I'd rather get you substance than, although I do appreciate the laughter that reaffirms me. It's bucket filling for me, I guess. But this isn't about me. This is about you tonight. So if you have questions, please just butt in, I suppose. For those of you watching at home, I'm sorry I can't answer your questions. If you project them, to the people who are here, I will do my best. But in any event, all right, that's government data. There are many classifications of government data. The three types really are public, private, or confidential. And this depends on whether it's public data on individuals, private data on individuals, confidential data on individuals, or not on individuals. The one that we mostly deal with is private data on individuals, and that is data that the public doesn't get to have, but the subject gets to have. So for example, my own health records, or my child's health records in the school. You can't give them to Care 11. I don't know why Care 11 would care if they knew my daughter, but they can't access it, but I can access it as her parent. That's private data. Confidential gets used a lot, and it gets used wrongly, particularly by lay people, particularly by vendors who want to come in and say, all of the information in our proposal is confidential. You cannot show this to anybody. No, it's not. It's data, and it's probably public data, to be honest. But confidential data is data that is not public, and the subject of the data doesn't have a right to access it. And I think, I'm sure I have it elsewhere, but I'll say it right now. Very little data is actually confidential. The biggest example, the most prevalent example in school, though, is the name of a reporter of mandatory maltreatment. So if I'm a school employee and I report maltreatment against, and I always pick on Mr. Smith and Mrs. Johnson, sorry if that's hitting anybody, those are just the names I go with. If I try to get more specific, I invariably pick on somebody. I had one presentation I was giving on sexual harassment, and I said, hypothetically, you have a seasonal employee named Oscar. Seems safe, right? Man stands up in the back and says, I am a seasonal groundskeeper named Oscar. And I said, I'm sorry, I wrote this presentation before I knew you worked here. I'm about to accuse you of a lot of nasty things, and I don't mean any of it. So, Mr. Smith and Mrs. Johnson, I apologize if you're watching. But if I report maltreatment by Mr. Smith or Mrs. Johnson, they don't get to know that I am the one who reported it, even though it's data on them. That is confidential data. Now, I could tell them, I want them to know it was me, or sometimes I've heard the county or MDE might screw up and tell them, but that's not your problem. That's the county or MDE's problem. But it is confidential in your hands. So if they come to you and say, who reported? Well, I can't tell you. That's confidential data. Statute says I can't have it. Again, overused, particularly by vendors. The other category is public data. If something is public, the public has a right to access it. That's sort of the end of that. It's an easy enough just definition. I want to point out, though, that public does not mean the same thing as published. So if there is something public, you don't have to put it on your website. You don't have to actively seek out the person who it's about or actively seek out the media. You don't have to, ring it from the rafters or anything. But if somebody asks for it, they can have it. And ask for it is in a proper data request, and I'll talk about answering those a little later in the presentation. So,
Can I pause you there?
Yes, please.
So like in our expansion team, we'll have a number of folks putting in bids.
Mm-hmm.
Is that public or
confidential?
Bid through a bid law process?
I mean, right now, we're just asking a number of folks to say about what will your fees be, percentage of fees, and how much would it cost for us to work together with you, and is that public?
The answer, it's a great lawyer answer, it depends. If it's through the formal bid law, they are private up until a certain point, and it's usually the point at which bids are formally opened. Right now, it's just kind of informal email, hey, how much is it gonna cost to, if you were gonna come, give me an estimate. Depending on the process, it may be public, but it's very specific based on the process you're using. So, but again, formal bid process, if you go out for formal bids for roofers or whatever, that's generally private until bids are opened. And some data is public, however, the name of the person putting in the bid is, but, and I think their address and a few other little details, but, so let me know if you have questions, as those come up. That's a little more specific, case by case.
And in Dan's scenario, it's not a matter of we won't disclose it later, it's just that we're in the process and we're trying to be fair in terms of negotiations or other people that are interested in bidding. We just want to disclose that prior to those discussions.
So if you get a proper data request, we may have to respond to it differently, again, depending what process you're using. If it's truly just informal, everyone else might have a right to see it. It sort of depends where you are and what process you're going down. So I don't know enough specifics to answer that one right now, I'm sorry to say, but I'm happy to send you the bid law statute later with that information. I'll make a note of that.
I did see a case on, I told you about it, actually, where St. Paul schools was going through it. And they actually did, they got compelled to,
Who was that?
it was actually next to corners, to the school board, something like that. I want to say it was St. Paul Schools District, but it was.
Seems likely.
Out here where I felt like it was kind of be relevant to us.
Mm-hmm. And that's, there are tons of cases, and I haven't actually talked about enforcement of the Data Practices Act, I think that's later on in my printed materials, but the Department of Administration Information Policy Analysis Division, they used to be called IPAD, but they've gotten away from that. I think maybe Apple found out what they were called. But in any event, the Department of Administration issues advisory opinions and also deals with complaints and may say you have to release this. There's relatively little actual litigation, because usually people go to IPAD and IPAD says yes or no, and that's the end of it. If you do get an IPAD opinion and you comply with it, there's a safe harbor provision. So if IPAD says you don't need to release it, even if they are reversed by the Court of Appeals, you can't be found liable for money damage. And no disrespect intended for the Department of Administration, I disagree with some of their opinions. And they've been reversed a few times in the Court of Appeals as well, so they don't always get it right. Their amount of times they get it right, I think, varies depending on whether they agreed with me or not, but that's, my ego, I think. In any event, so yeah, they're very well, could be, if it's a formal bid process, once some things are opened or once you're at a certain point in the process, certain information, and then, like I said, vendors also do become public. Vendors also would say this is confidential. Trade secret data is what they like to say, and very little is actually trade secret data if you apply the formula in the Data Practices Act. Like the secret ingredients in Coca-Cola, trade secret. The fact that you serve 2,300 clients across the country, not trade secret. But they want everything down to the number, a lot of vendors want everything down to all the terms of the contract, how much you're paying them to be confidential. And my answer when I'm reviewing a contract for a client is no. This is a document that needs to be approved at an open meeting. There's no private data on individuals in it. Your contract doesn't say this is a contract for, Mr. Smith or Mrs. Johnson's class or something like that. And even if it did, that'd probably be public unless we're talking about a contract for a specific student, which that name would be private. But in any event, they try to work things in, and then then you end up with a case or something trying to get it out. So I start by just saying, no, this is what we have to do. We have to comply with the Data Practices Act. There's a provision in the Data Practices Act says you can't contract around it, and any attempt to do so is void. So I tell them, and they usually back down on it. And usually there's someone push back saying, okay, fine, but we're going to later assert that everything's trade secret anyway. And I say, that's fine, you can do that later if there's a problem. but I'm going to release it in the meantime, and that's for you to figure out. That is a category of data that you will no doubt have to deal with. The two categories of data that school boards deal with, I think, the most, or schools deal with the most, are educational data and personnel data. So educational data, much like the definition of education record I said earlier, is any data on individuals maintained by the school because of a student. It relates to a student. So a student, current or former student. Most education data are private, meaning you can't disclose them. You can't disclose students' grades, special ed status, discipline history, things like that. And discipline history is where a lot of, and I say disclose, I mean to members of the public, what staff can see, and I'll get there in a minute. But you know, what staff can see is different than what members of the public can see. So even in high-profile situations, and of course, I hope this doesn't happen, but a student brings a weapon and there's a lockdown and you all know it's because of student X, you can't say student X brought a weapon to school today. That is a violation of student X's rights under the Data Practices Act, or the police were called because of student X. You cannot do that connection. The answer is there was a soft lockdown at school today, period. Police were involved, everything's fine. You can't say it was because of student X or any characteristics that would identify student X. A female student who happened to be in Mr. Johnson's class at third hour, okay, you know, that narrows it down so far that we all know who you're talking about. So it's not just names, it's identifying information. So again, most education data are private. However, educational data in general has to be disclosed to the subject of the data, who is the student, and the parents of the student, if the student is a minor or a dependent. You know, if they turn 18 but are still a dependent for tax purposes, the parent still has a right to access the data, even if the child doesn't want the parent to access the data. If the child has moved out, then the parent doesn't have a right to access it anymore. And moved out and is no longer claimed as dependent for tax purpose. I get one of those questions a year across all the clients I represent, so that doesn't come up too often. And generally the answer is just ask the parent if they still claim them as dependent. So that's, it gets a little odd. And I think I have things in here about custody down the road a little further on, but I would say a parent, even if a parent doesn't have custody, generally has the right to data on their child unless there's a very specific court order. So court can terminate parental rights, which includes the right to access information, but just saying that mom has full custody or dad has full custody doesn't take away the other parent's right to access that data. They might not be able to pick up the child, sign permission slips, come to meetings, visit, anything like that, but they get data until the court says they don't. And that is a fairly high standard before a court will do that. I represent a school district that's been sort of tangentially involved in some litigation that's, I think, is up to the Minnesota Supreme Court, although I don't think they'll take it. You know, just a nasty custody dispute, and the court has gone so far in that case as to say, not only can you not access the school, but you cannot contact the school at all, even through your lawyer, which was, I thought, quite surprising. I got a sort of a nice call from the parent's lawyer saying, I guess this is the last time we're going to talk to you. I'm just telling you this order's out there. I said, well, all right, been nice talking to you, I guess. He was okay. I don't know what that was from, but in any event, it's an exceptional thing. So if a parent comes in and says, my ex can't see records, I date myself with movie references, and so I say, just channel your inner Jerry Maguire and show me the order. You know, just show me the order. And that's my answer for a lot of custody disputes too. Just, I'll do whatever the court order says, just show me the order that says this. Otherwise, it's mom's rights or dad's rights. I work with somebody who hasn't seen Ghostbusters, which is deeply alarming to me. So no, like I said, movie references. All right.
So all this pertains to students who are minors.
Yep. And generally, when a student turns 18, their rights under the Data Practices Act transfer to them. However, there's a provision of FERPA, and compliance with FERPA is compliance with the Data Practices Act in this case, that says the parents of an adult child between the ages of 18 and 26, I believe, who is still claimed as dependent, can access the child's records without the child's consent. So even if they're an adult. So that's how parents of college kids get the report cards, even if they don't want them to see it. So yes, when you have a student who turns 18 and says, I don't want my parents, and sometimes it's grades, sometimes I don't want my mom to know that I'm pregnant. Okay, neat. She has a right to access records. I don't have to go tell her, but she has a right to access records. So when she calls and says, "Hey, I want a copy of the sign-out log," because she went somewhere that wasn't school today, and it says on the sign-out Planned Parenthood, mom gets to see that. So that's where it gets dicey. There are other provisions that may come into play, but that's the big question. I say I get about one of these a year. Every other year, so it's that one. And one time it was just a boy who was just mad his parents didn't want him to see anything. And that was, that was okay too. We talked about that, but same kind of thing. But when we're talking about a minor, both parents, when we're talking about an adult, if the child is still claimed as a dependent. I have the practice tip on page 3, FERPA education records, and the difference between education records and educational data. That's just a fun thing to pull out at cocktail parties, really, to be able to define the two. But they are basically the same. If we're talking about educational data, all your educational data will be educational records. All right, one big exception to privacy is to the private status of data is directory information. If you have designated information as directory information in your directory information policy, and you have followed all of the steps of publicizing your directory information policy, sending it home, letting parents opt out, etc., then directory information can be public data. And the caveat here is only the directory information listed in your policy is public. So for example, email address, if email address is not identified in your policy, it's not directory information and you cannot share it. So this is the policy that makes yearbooks allowable. This is the provision. This is the provision that makes those class lists that you send home to kindergarten parents in some schools to arrange play dates allowable. Or I used to get a directory. I don't know if schools actually have directories anymore, if it's just an email list or whatever, but this is the policy that makes that possible, or the provision of the law that makes it possible. However, directory information, again, has to be identified by school policy, and it generally has to be the information that is of the same nature, that is to say, harmless if disclosed, or relatively harmless, as the information listed in the directory information regulation under FERPA, which is the name, address, telephone listing, date and place of birth, participation in officially recognized activities and sports, weight and height of members of athletic teams, attendance, and awards received. One thing in there is special ed status is not and cannot be directory information. It is not in your policy, especially if you have the MSBA model policy, it's not in there. And it's not something that is generally considered harmless. So knowing that a child is disabled. There's one iPad opinion from late 90s, early aughts. Teacher did a very nice thing. Teacher bought a yearbook spread. Mrs. Johnson's special ed classroom, look how far we've come. Really nice. 8 kids in the picture, smiling. 7 of them were okay with it. One parent wasn't okay with it, didn't like the fact that her child was special ed, called to attention in the yearbook for all the other children in the district and their parents to see. Got an iPad opinion. Sure enough, A, it wasn't in the directory information policy. B, it was not the type of information that could have been in the directory information policy anyway. Sorry, school, you did a bad thing by being too nice to your kids, basically. That's one example of the Data Practices Act being applied in a way that I don't think is consistent with the intention. However, conversely, had a case years ago now, I believe it was a paraprofessional, put on Facebook or MySpace or something, some social media, a picture of what I can only describe as a cage. I don't know if it was equipment storage or what, that was in the special ed room with a child in it, making a face. I think posed for the picture, but with along the lines of, "Hey, look at what I have to deal with every day. These children are literally animals." Her heart was not in the right place. Same violation. District violated the child's rights under the Data Practices Act. It is not, picture can be directory information, but a picture that identifies the child as special ed is not directory information. Same issue that the well-meaning yearbook got in trouble for. This is why that provision exists, to prevent this kind of thing. So one practice tip in here, parents do have the right to opt out of directory information. Not a lot do, but double check. Somebody asks, you get a request from the media for all student addresses, or you get a request from a political candidate for all student addresses or all parent addresses. All right, neat. Let me make sure I can give you all that. All right, but you want to just make sure that you don't violate somebody's rights when you're responding to a data request. The other type of data that the board,
Ask a
yeah.
question. So a very real example, and I know we probably have already looked into this, but I just want to see if I understand it. So like you mentioned yearbook.
Mhm.
So let's say we don't have a policy to share directory information. We hire a photographer to take yearbook pictures.
Mhm.
We give the photographer student email addresses so they can schedule,
Mhm.
and we handle that by contract. Is that okay?
So you can share, so first of all, if you don't have a directory information policy that identifies email addresses, the email addresses are private data on students. You can share private data on students with contractors whose jobs reasonably require access to that information to do their job. So me, for example, if you call me in to address a special education student issue, that's one of the things I do here. I get to know everything, even if other teachers in the building might not be allowed to know it, because I need to know it for my job. So if you hire a photographer and they need to have email addresses to coordinate scheduling or to send the packages home or whatever, yes, but then the contract has to have language about data and how it's going to be used and how it's going to be destroyed and not sold and things like that, just to protect the school. What they do with it after that is possibly a violation on them. However, if you don't have a directory information policy at all, taking the picture isn't a problem, but having the yearbook would be, because the contractor can see it, but then no one else gets to see the pictures, who is not an employee of the school district, of the school rather. So you do have one. 515, great.
Protection of privacy of people records.
Sure, it gets down there to a definition of, yep,
You have directory information.
great. And you send the notices home and people can opt out?
It's part of the
Enrollment process.
Yep, great.
the registration process.
Yeah, and so it's an annual thing, so it does have to be sent annually. Great, then you have a policy in place, and yes, the contractor can see it, to answer your question. Any other definition of student data? I do have some student data, yeah.
So if a political party requests information on our students' directory information,
Public data is public. Anyone can request it. If a political party,
so even if it's not related to anything with the school,
Mhm.
it's still public data, we have to,
yeah.
if it fits in the policy, the directory information policy.
Yep, if it is public data, anyone can request it and you have to respond. Even if it's completely unrelated, it's a community member. There have been a lot of data requests going around by politically motivated groups asking about all public data regarding masking, not necessarily about students specifically, which would be private. All public data regarding social studies curricula and critical race theory. And those, the way they ask them is very broad in some cases. All policy or all public data containing the words white, color, race, theory, critical, and then a bunch of other words so they can try to find what they're looking for in there. Discrimination, privilege, which gets a lot of my emails. They all say attorney-client privilege on the bottom, which then you can't give them because they're attorney-client privilege. But anyway, so it could be 50,000 pages, and they might not have a student here. It could just be a political organization asking for it. And sure, obligation is to respond to it. Now, if you get into a situation like that, we have some tips and some tools to help it be less painful. But yeah, the obligation would be to respond. So public data is public until there's a legislative fix. Sure.
Is there an exception or duty to protect the identification of maybe students that are in a protected class?
How so?
Or, for example, let's just say a child.
So the fact that the child is special education is not public data. However, let's say I'm a teacher and I have 3 special ed students in my class and someone says, I want the names of all the children in Christian's class. That is directory information, their names. Now, if I'm a special ed teacher and all of my students are special ed, that's private data because it identifies them as special ed students.
And we have to, so obviously we would not disclose
Mhm.
names that we're not supposed to, but do we have a duty to actively protect it?
I'm not sure I see the distinction. If a violation of the Data Practices Act occurs when data is distributed that should not be distributed, and
It should not be distributed.
right, so if private data is inadvertently or intentionally disclosed, that's a violation of the Data Practices Act that can subject the school to litigation, liability, and I believe a criminal penalty for knowingly violating it, although I'm not aware of anybody ever being charged with it.
Is it also fair, Christian, to say that, like, on the school board, we should be very much aware of this, but if we get a request, is it not fair to send it to the administration as well?
So every school has an obligation to identify a responsible authority, somebody whose job it is to respond to data requests, and they should be the only person responding to data requests. So I assume that's you. It typically is the administrator, but it could be somebody else if you've identified somebody else, an HR person or, no? Well, it's in your policy. It's either in that one or in the policy for something on personnel records. There does need to be a designated responsible authority, and that person is responsible for responding. And yes, I'm even without that, I'm a big fan of having one person who is able to be more nimble and call a lawyer if they need to respond than people sort of firing off.
And the latter is what I appreciate, so I think the board should all understand the differences and the importance of it, so that you don't be tempted to just, fire something off, but in the end, if we get a request, I believe it makes sense that it goes to.
And I know it's hard to believe that some people will fish, I'm gonna email 2 board members to ask all of them for data, because they're the ones I know will respond, the other ones will send it to the administrator. So if everybody's sending it to the administrator, get a unified response, we can maybe cut down on almost everybody's workload in responding to these things. All right, personnel data collected because somebody is or was an employee, an applicant for employment, or a volunteer. I'm sorry, before we leave student data, under the Data Practices Act, but not FERPA, data on parents is also classified as private education data. For the most part private, although it can be directory. So parent's name, parent's phone number, parent's address could be all in your directory information policy. The one example of that is there's an iPad opinion, again, from years ago. Dad wanted to know how much money mom was putting into the student's lunch account. And the amount of money in the student's lunch account is public, there's private data on the student that dad can see. Mom putting it in there is private data on mom that dad can't see. So there's a distinction there. Did mom did mom drop off Billy's prescription? We don't have a prescription on file for Billy, maybe a fine answer. Mom brought it in yesterday, that says something mom did. So, think about sort of grammatically, who is the subject of the sentence? That is the subject of the data. Now, it may be inextricably intertwined. I'm telling you, I didn't bring Billy's prescription in. If you say we have a prescription on file for Billy, you might be saying mom did it. But, so that they get a little dicey there. But for that one, I would say he can know if Billy's prescription's being filled or not. I mean, that's data he might need to know. All right, moving that to personnel data, it's data about an employee, a volunteer, or an independent contractor. Not the employee of an independent contractor, there's a distinction there. So, for example, you work with Ratwick, my law firm, you don't contract with me personally. So data about me is not classified by the Data Practices Act. Anyway. So if you have anyone who comes as an independent contractor themselves. In general, data about employee personnel data is private. There are some statutory exceptions, and they are the name, actual gross salary, salary range, contract fees, gross pension, value of other fringe benefits, all other remuneration, including salary reimbursement, expense reimbursement, their title and bargaining unit if applicable, job description, education, training, and background, but not grades. So depending, I'm doing a data request for all resumes for this teacher position because I want to know who got the job that I didn't get. I can do that data request. A lot of it's going to be private data, but the resumes will have some of this public data. So anyone that's read the statute, and it's 13.43, generally just asks for the public data that's identified. So yeah, you can see that Christian graduated from the University of Minnesota. And I think it mentions honors in there too. So you can see that I graduated magna cum laude, but you can't see my GPA if it was on there. And previous work experience. You can see if my resume tells you where I worked in a school in Michigan for 8 years before going to law school, you could see that. but not references. You know, the names of my references wouldn't be covered there. So it's, you know, it takes a minute to look at it. Date and first date of employment, the one that people get bogged down on, it's the D, the lowercase d on page 4. The existence and status of complaints or charges against an employee, regardless of whether the complaints or charges result in discipline, but not the information underlying that, not what the complaint is about, the nature or the quality or characteristic of the complaint or data identifying the individual complainant. So again, hypothetically, I'm an employee of the school. There's a complaint about me that I punched Billy in the face. Somebody asks, what are you doing about Christian? He punched Billy in the face. What are you doing? We have received a complaint against Mr. Schaefer. The investigation is ongoing. That's it. To say we received a complaint that Mr. Schaefer punched Billy in the face is a violation of my rights under the Data Practices Act. And gosh, if you're investigating me, I might be kind of ticked off and looking for an excuse to sue you for damages, right? So I want to be careful about that. And again, there's no exception for high profile. So an allegation that teacher X, you know, was you know, assaulting or sexually assaulting a student, it's, you know, it's all over the school. Parents are hearing about it. Students are talking about it. Again, I hope none of this ever happens, but you got to go to the highest profile, worst case scenario. We've received a complaint against teacher X. Teacher X is on administrative leave, or teacher X is on leave right now. That's fine. The investigation is ongoing. Don't say administrative leave. Teacher X is on leave right now. The investigation is ongoing. That's it. You shouldn't preface it by saying we take all allegations of sexual abuse very seriously, because now you're implying that what the nature of the complaint is. That can be a separate email, certainly. The number of complaints is public data. So if, you know, 3 students have accused me of punching them in the face because I'm fed up with them and it's Tuesday. No, sorry, that's my kids. No, just kidding. The number of complaints. We've received 3 complaints against Mr. Schaefer. The investigation's ongoing. All right, but then once there is a final disposition of a disciplinary action, then the fact that that occurred, the nature of the disciplinary action, and all data documenting the basis for that action do become public. So you do your investigation of me, you review the security footage, you see that I punched Billy in the face, you fire me for punching a student, no brainer. Once the board has made the decision to fire me, because that one has to be a board decision, yep, all right. The investigation is now complete. I am fired. Christian was fired for punching a student in the face, and here's the termination letter that says you punched a student in the face. We have it on recording. You admitted you did it. You said you were frustrated because they stole your cookie, whatever it may be. You can't be an employee here anymore. Get out. I don't know. Words to that effect. You probably don't say get out in your termination letters. You're probably nicer than me. But that becomes public. So, and again, regardless of the possibility of an appeal, you don't have union employees here, I don't believe, so there's no arbitration process in a traditional school district. It doesn't become final until either the arbitration process is complete or the grievance period is run with nobody electing that. So don't worry about that. It's just in here for sake of completeness. Or a veteran, I'm sorry, the veteran, if a veteran is contesting it under the Veterans Preference Act, doesn't become final until the end of that process. So otherwise, it's just as soon as termination, the board makes the decision. Anything less than that, administration makes the decision. So you gave me a reprimand for not punching Billy in the face, but for saying, hey, knock it off, or I'm going to have to punch you in the face, something like that. The fact that I said that would become public as part of that reprimand. Any settlement agreements? Any settlement agreements buying somebody out? That's okay. I thought you might have a question. That would become public. The work location, a work telephone number, not the home telephone number or a cell number. So even if a parent really wants to get in contact with their favorite teacher or thinks that they need to have that teacher's cell phone so they can communicate with them all the time, I see that a lot in special ed cases. No, that's private data. The teacher can give it if they want to, but you don't have to. Public officials, there are an exception for this, and I want to make sure we cover everything, so I'm going to blitz by it a little bit. Public officials, realistically, it's the principal and the executive director here, and that public data related to the complaint or charge is public if there's disciplinary action or that person resigns, basically, or is released as settlement agreement. Medical status, medical leave, the fact that somebody is out on leave can be disclosed. The reason for the leave may not. Mr. Smith is out sick today. Mr. Smith is on, I'm sorry, that's the reason. Mr. Smith is using sick leave today, not Mr. Smith is sick. So that's, I mean, easily slipped up. Mr. Smith is on medical leave. Mrs. Johnson is on medical leave. Not, congratulations, Mrs. Johnson is on maternity leave. That's the reason. If Mrs. Johnson cares to share that she's on maternity leave, she can disclose it. The school can't. Even if it's, hey, I saw Mrs. Johnson yesterday and she said she was going to be out on maternity leave. She's not there today. I'm guessing she had the baby. Congratulations. Mrs. Johnson is on leave. Is on medical leave. I'll relay your message.
So
Yeah.
we can use the word medical leave or sick leave.
Just say leave.
We should probably use personal because that's how we have
Yeah.
it in our policy.
Yeah, if your policy says personal leave, Mrs. Johnson's out on personal leave, or just say leave if you don't want to distinguish between the two. Or Mrs. Johnson isn't in today, that's easy, that's even more vague. I'm fine with that, or Mr. Smith, whatever.
But if Mrs. Johnson does have her baby and wants an announcement made, she can direct that.
I mean, the lawyer is saying, please get a written release authorizing authorizing you to disclose that she had the baby, and pictures of the baby and all that. That doesn't ever happen. You do get informal emails, hey, had the baby, can you tell everybody? Can you tell my kids? I mean, if she puts it in writing, while it's not technically a release, she's gonna have a hard time suing you if you do what you ask her to do, so.
It's like in an email and the pictures are attached to the email.
And it says, please share it with the kids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But otherwise, I mean, again, good news, you don't get sued over. But, hey, I am going through cancer and I don't want anyone to know about it. And then, a parent calls and said, hey, the school told me that you or your husband's going through cancer. Well, wait a minute, I told you not to tell anyone about it. You disclosed my private medical information. This is really stressful on me at this hard time in my life. So be very careful, right? Personnel data with other subjects. So there are a couple of cases on this. If two employees, let's say hypothetically, get into a fist fight, the surveillance video is data on both of them because you're maintaining it because you want to discipline both employees. And both employees have a right to see it. Even though it's technically private data on this guy and private data on that employee, they both have a right to see it. There is something of a distinction with regarding student data, and I'll get there, what surveillance video is, but that's, because that's covered by FERPA and there's a whole different rule, but for employees, if it's data on multiple employees, they both have a right to see it. Applicant data, some is public, some is private, just keep an eye on it. Investigation materials, the complainant gets their own statement, the complainant gets their own statement, so I'd file a complaint against Mr. Smith, and unless you do a verbatim recording of a person's statement, they're not a statement that the person's required to access or is allowed to access. So, however, complainants and witnesses might be allowed to have notes about themselves under these two Supreme Court cases. So if you get a request for, hey, I was participating in this complaint and I want to see what the notes are about what I said, they may have a right to see it. Proceed with caution. That's one of those give me a call, let's see what's in it kind of situations. Harassment data are its own thing. The employee generally does not have a right to access the data that would identify the complainant. So I file a complaint against Mrs. Johnson saying she sexually harassed me. The employee does not have a right to see that right away unless there is going to be a proceeding of some kind to discipline. I have some other general types of data that are, come up sometimes, general non-public data, which includes security data. So if the blueprints of the school may be security data that the public doesn't have a right to see. If you have them for security purposes, your security features for active shooter drills, things like that. If you have anything like that in there, general public doesn't have a right to see it. Certain health data, library data is kind of interesting. Not relevant at all, probably. You don't operate a library, but the fact that it's in there, how much information about your library card is public, I think that's fascinating. But in any event, the Data Practice Act covers a lot of stuff. That's why these things are in here. Even if it's not student data, even if it's not personnel data, this is just a reminder, the Data Practice Act is very broad. Unless it's classified as private or confidential, it's presumed to be public. So, just start from that assumption and work backwards if there's a reason to not disclose something. And again, it depends on the content of the data, the purpose, the reason for which it's recorded or maintained, but not the location. So this is an area where schools get into a little bit of trouble. Personal cell phones, personal email addresses. Hey, the best way to reach me is always my cell phone. I'm encouraging my parents to call my cell phone, my students to call my cell phone. That's great. I get text messages from parents. If there is a complaint or something, or if a parent does a data request, they get all those text messages. It doesn't matter that it was sent to your personal cell phone. It's complicated because you cannot compel a staff member to log into their phone and search the phone because it's a Fourth Amendment issue for them, search and seizure. But at the same time, it's data the parent's entitled to have. So, for example, and this is more or less hypothetical, I'm an employee, I send another employee after a contentious meeting, gosh, that meeting was contentious, Mrs. Johnson, the parent in this case, is a real you-know-what. And I maybe use more colorful language than I care to do on a recording. Mrs. Johnson, after that meeting, is feeling cantankerous and orders, requests all data about her. She gets that recording. She gets that text message where I called her a nasty word to vent to one of my coworkers. Same thing with email. I had a due process hearing years and years and years ago now. We thought we had a pretty good case till we looked at the emails, and there was a series of emails from one particularly upset staff member to the principal and other people venting, where they called the parent the B word, the C word, and an ethnic slur on top of it. And questioned her parenting and a whole bunch of other stuff. The person who sent these emails was going to be the rock star witness at my hearing. She was no longer the rock star witness in my hearing. We had to settle because of it. So it really, my mom of all people put on Facebook, dance like nobody's watching, text and email like you have to read it in court tomorrow. And mom's not a lawyer. She's never been in court as far as I know. A witness one time I can think of. Otherwise, nothing with any of this, but she's absolutely right. Don't put it in writing if you wouldn't want the person you're talking about to see it and if you wouldn't want to read it in court. It's government data. They have a right to see it. All right. Generally, private or confidential data has to be used for the purposes identified in statute. You have to give a 10-as-in warning when the school is collecting private or confidential data. This is often overlooked by schools, really asking, hey, Billy, did you push Susie down the slide? When a principal in elementary school does that, that's a situation for which a 10-as-in warning should be administered. You stop a kid in the hallway who's running, hey, what are you doing running like that? Maybe you need to give a 10-as-in warning if they're talking about private student data, because, hey, I'm going to, this next class. Sorry, my phone always thinks I'm talking to it these days. I'm never talking to it. It's neglected. It wants to be involved in more. Anyway, you're asking for private data. Hey, I was late. Being late is private data on the student. You asked, you need to give a 10-as-in warning. Nobody does it. You should try to give more 10-as-in warnings, I guess, but please try to comply with the letter of the law. But in any event, nobody does it. 10-as-in warnings, I think, should be in writing, especially for big ticket things like investigations. They don't have to be. They just have to say the purpose and intended use of the data, whether the person has to give it to you or has a right to say no, any consequences of not supplying it, and where it's going to be stored and who can access it. Private educational data, okay. Education data is disclosed upon request to the parent of the student, informed, or when you have informed consent of parent or the student if the child's over 18. Informed consent means in writing, written consent. So when I say you can't disclose the fact that somebody's in special ed without parent consent, you can't disclose it without parent consent or one of these exceptions that start on page 9. A valid court order, some statute that specifically authorizes access to the data, directory data, health or safety emergency, that's a very narrow exception. So I need to know the student's home address, and they've opted out of the directory information policy because I'm a police officer and the student ran home and said he's going to kill himself. That's right now an active health or safety emergency. I need to know the student's home address, and he's opted out of the directory information policy because I want to go arrest him for selling drugs in the park yesterday. Not an active health or safety emergency, no exception to the statute. It's a violation of the student's rights under federal law to give that police officer that information. I am mentioned in a police report for a charter school as the reason that the police could not have information they were asking for. Stung a little to be mentioned by name, but I guess I did tell the principal to tell them my name and give them my phone number. Cleared it up with the county attorney, it's all fine, but the police are used to having more access to data than they can in the school. There's no general exception for law enforcement. There has to be that active health or safety emergency, directory information, parental consent in writing, things like that. Police officer walks in and says they need to see something, a surveillance video because of a fight that got reported. Great. absent one of these exceptions, I need a court order. A search warrant's a court order. Give me a search warrant. Give me a subpoena from the city attorney or the county attorney prosecuting it, and we'll follow the FERPA procedures for responding to a subpoena, and that's generally just giving notice to the parents of the child whose data it is. And we will comply with you. We just don't want to get sued on the way out. That's it. We're happy to work with the police. I'm not saying no. I'm saying not right now because this federal law that nobody outside of people who work for schools know anything about says I can't give it to you. Transfer of records to a new school, there's the subpoena. I mentioned videos of students. Students probably are treated differently. It's still a little unclear under FERPA. Long story short, if you can't edit the video of two students in a fight, both parents want to see the video because each one thinks the other child's responsible. If you can't edit the video to only show, my child, which is tough in a moving fight, when I'm looking at it, and only show the other child and the other parent's looking at it, then you can't just give them the video, but you do have to show them the video. They can't take a recording of it, but they can come in and look at it. That's an odd thing that's out there. Personnel data, there's a list of when people can see personnel data. It's by statute. Responding to data requests, some general principles. Data has to be organized in a way that is easily accessible. Schools and counties and cities, varying degrees of success on that. You do have to have a request to the responsible authority. If you're not the responsible authority, you get a request, send it to the responsible authority. Limitations, access rights, these are all sort of form things that are in here. I'm trying to stick to the more interesting stuff in the time that we have. You have a right to charge for data. I don't know if your policy says you charge for data. That includes prepayment. So if your policy says, hey, you've requested 10,000 pages, the actual time, we're going to bill you the actual time spent getting the 10,000 pages, and you're going to have to prepay before we let you see it. That's fine. That's legal. If the pages are 100 pages or less of single-spaced paper, then you can only charge 25 cents a page. But otherwise, otherwise, it's the actual cost for searching and retrieving the data, including employee time, but not the time spent separating data, private data from public data. So I asked for 10,000 pages, and I spent 57 hours, culling those 10,000 pages of public data from the 100,000 pages of responsive data. That's too bad. They don't have to pay for that. And it is, by the way, the charge has to be at the lowest rate of the person who could do it. So, the hourly rate. So in general, unless it's something that only you have access to, it's probably a secretarial rate. Private data on individuals, just one other thing. Contractors can access it, as I mentioned. Employees, I get a lot of questions about this.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't matter, but is there a preferred way to distribute them, like electronic or paper, or can they insist that it comes paper?
You have to provide it in the form that you maintain it. You can provide it in other forms, but it's not required. So typically, I send a PDF if they ask for it, because you can charge for the PDF too. But I get a lot of requests. You have to provide it in this type of spreadsheet format. It's not Excel. It's something else. They're public data companies that aggregate this data. They want it in this kind of format because it's easier for their system. And the answer is we don't have to do that. We can charge you for moving over there if we want to, but we don't have to provide it in a format that we don't maintain it.
So we have a 100-page PDF. We pull that, we email it to them and charge them 25 cents a page.
So here's what, $4?
It's not
Or no,
that.
sorry, 40. Yeah.
As long as it's in our policy.
As long as it's in your policy and as long as it's consistent. I wouldn't pick on one, hey, we've never charged for data before, but we don't like you because of, you're a member of a protected class or you're, a political organization or something, so we're going to charge you out of the blue. So, again, can you? Sure, but then you start to get like retaliation claims or discrimination claims, things like that. One thing very quickly on student data, staff have a right to access student data if they have a legitimate educational reason to access that data or a work-related reason to access the data. Educational interest comes from FERPA, work-related reason comes from the Data Praxis Act. I know you're a small school, but for example, if there is a behavior incident involving an 8th grade student, the 6th grade staff who had him last year and is just curious and will never interact with that 8th grade student again, does not have the right to know what happened. Yep, we suspended Billy for what happened in Mrs. Johnson's class. You can't tell Mr. Smith that, the sixth grade teacher. So I get a lot of questions about that, particularly in small schools. Well, I'm going to see him in the hall every day. Well, unless there's a change to a BIP or something like that where the staff need to know about it, sorry, that's just gossip at this point, and the Data Practices Act prohibits that. Very quickly, and I'm sorry to end on this note, but for board members, generally, unless there's something pending before the board, you might not have a right to see it, if it's private data. Public data, for sure. If there's an action pending, certainly you need to know all about it, but that same thing. What is your legitimate interest in seeing it as in your role with the board? So, again, it doesn't come up all that often. I get a call every couple of years about that, but there's an old iPad opinion on it. So unless there's something pending that you need to see for your role on the board, it's kind of just the same as anyone else at the school. I do have some information about records retention at the end. Just develop a policy and follow the policy. Technically, if you don't have a records retention schedule that's been approved by the state, you can't destroy anything. Again, I don't know, there's a lot of schools don't have a records retention schedule. I don't know that anybody's ever been charged criminally for destroying records without having one, but it's a theoretical possibility and it doesn't sound like fun to me. So get your records retention schedule in place. Yeah.
Along those lines, a draft never sent. Does that fall into that category, or is that something that can be disposed of since that was an idea that was never shared?
So it's not a record because it didn't go to official board, but if somebody requests data before that draft has been destroyed, that's data on them. So if you have sitting in your outbox or your draft box or retrievable from your, sitting in your you didn't take out the trash in your outbox or your deleted box, I don't know what it's called, non-excised trash box. Anyway, and somebody requests that, they can have that. So that's a place where I've seen some concerns too. If you use Google Vault tracks every keystroke, which makes data retrieval sort of unpleasant for me. Because, hey, there was 100 emails, but, and maybe it's not quite every keystroke, but it's, there's 100 emails, but here's this one, dear Mr. Smith, dear Mr. S, dear Mr. Smith, your child, and, finally I'm like, okay, which one of these am I sending? Or am I annoyed enough with the person who asked for them that I'm going to send all of them? So just how it's maintained, they have a right to see that, so.
Another distinction I've heard is to not use your personal email address for.
Same reason as personal text messages. Yes, using your personal email address makes it harder for the school to comply with its obligations under the Data Practices Act, but it's still government data. So you send a personal email that is about, if it's about your role with the school, or it's about a student because of your role with the school. It's one thing if you're, family friends with, Billy and Billy's parents and you're inviting them to a Christmas party because they're your family friend. That's not government data. But if that same family friend sends you something and says, hey, Billy got in trouble today at school, I want you to talk to Mr. Johnson about homework. Now it's because you're a board member or an employee here, and it's about the student because the student's a student here. That's government data, even if it's sent to your old Hotmail account that you haven't checked in 5 years, hypothetically speaking. And the parent can request it, and you have to provide it. Or if it's data about Mr. Smith was a real jerk to Billy, at some point Mr. Smith might be able to see that. So it just makes it harder. I don't recommend using personal email, personal text messaging. I don't recommend the use of social media at all for any professional duties because of this and all kinds of other reasons that we don't have time to go into tonight unless you want to keep me here all night.
What about the school, though? Can the school carry Twitter? Or
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
But it's subject to the Data Practices Act. So, I mentioned the staff member who posted the thing about the child in the cage didn't have the heart in the right place. But if the school had said, special ed science fair today, let's look at Mr. Smith's special ed class and see how far they've come and how proud we are of them, just translate that yearbook example to a modern Twitter example, that would be a violation of the Students' Rights on the Data Practices Act. Same thing if you want to publicize an event. I had a school that wanted to publicize their special ed science fair. It was great. I saw all about it in my role with the school. There was one parent who opted out, and so the special ed science fair, was broadcast on KSTP or KARE 11 or one of those, And 6 out of 7 kids involved were on the news, and the one kid was, not pictured, other students declining to participate, in the media. So like they moved the kids' project over to the corner while they took the pictures, and that's all fine. They can do that, but they have to do it that way, otherwise they're violating the students' data practice rights. So it's one of those situations where maybe not as intended, but we have to be careful with it.
I need to cut us here. I'm
Yeah.
sure we have more questions, but is there, we're kind of running out of time. Are we able to send you a note if something comes up then, or what do you?
So I believe the board's policy is that only the executive director or the board chair can send me an email to incur, charges on the school's behalf. If you care to, I'm happy to answer data privacy questions. If there are any follow-up questions from today, just shoot me an email. I'll answer them en masse, if that's okay.
Is this document able to be shared in our notes, or do you want to keep this?
I sent it to you. It is, it's data. You may certainly keep this. I appreciate if you don't put it on the website, but.
Okay, let's
just-
do it that way then.
But however, I'd be willing to bet if you searched for my name and data practices, you'd find something like that on the internet already. I would appreciate it. It probably is public data if anyone asks for it, but, it's a board meeting. Copy needs to be kept in the packet. If anyone is here, they can see it, but under the open meeting law. But just again, I'd appreciate it if it wasn't on the website.
Okay. All right,
Enjoy it and send it to staff who have questions.
thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for coming.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Once again, while it's not all about me, I do appreciate the applause. Thank you.
I will say we'll break at 6:05 and we'll be back at 6:15. So, Amanda, you know how to turn the mic off? You ready, Amanda? We're on. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the MSA September 19th, 2022 School Board meeting. My name is Dan Ellingson, and I would like to call the meeting to order at 6:15. Joseph, we have now Joseph and Noah representing our student body here. So, Joseph, tonight, would you be able to read the mission and vision for us?
Alright, so our vision is to be an innovative, sustainable model of academic excellence for all students that creates a well-rounded lifelong learners and global citizens. Our mission is that we provide an accelerated and inclusive curricula and instruction in all subjects with emphasis on math and science.
Thank you very much. I'll start with a roll call. So, Dan Ellingson here, Cody Schneep,
Here.
DJ Johnson,
Here.
Maggie Burgraff,
Here.
Jeff Lang,
Here.
Edel Patel, Jennifer Bartle,
Here.
Wendell Sletton,
Here.
Teresa Ward.
Here.
Great, all those in attendance and non-voting student members, we have Joseph Ayelu. Is that pronounced correct?
Yeah.
You correct me?
No, you're
Okay. And Noah Yahela, you said? Yahela Shed. Great. Welcome. We've been looking forward all summer for you guys to attend. Thank you for coming. Moving on to approval of our agenda. Any conflict of interest? And I guess any conflict of interest you'd like to declare tonight? Otherwise, could we approve the agenda as written? I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
All second?
90 seconds. Any further discussion? All those in?
Just got a
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
As somebody who constructs the agenda,
Yeah.
should we have a motion and sticker for it? Should we have somebody else?
Oh, sure.
I'm just curious, practice.
I don't know, is there some, I think we also all get a chance to discuss, so, but, yeah, that's fine.
How many conflict of interest you're looking for?
So like if you have, a good question, so if you have something, you say, I remember 17 or whatever, my daughter does this, I can't talk about that, so it's just a good time to talk about it, and we can all remind ourselves, okay, now we're on 17, now we're gonna abstain. Any other questions with the agenda? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? So it passes 9-0. Good question. So this month we have our first monthly celebration since we've had a little break over the summer, and it's the summer staff. Right?
Yes, as we know, summer is kind of a quiet time in the form of teachers and students, but it's not for a lot of people that are working and have year-round contracts, but also there's so much that's getting done in the summer to prepare for our school year. So we want to bring in Kai, Rich, and Justin for all they've done, because as you know, we've had to add rooms, we've had to move, people are moving from one classroom to another, the parking lot, all the things that are going on, all the technology and getting things ready and smart boards, and it's just constant go, go, go for these people. So I just want to appreciate them, and I think we all did, because of how hard they worked this summer to get our school ready for the school year.
So, yeah, round of applause. If you guys are okay, we'd love to shake your hands, come around, and then I'm assuming maybe Kate, you can help take a photo for us, please?
Good job, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You betcha, you're welcome. Thank you, yep. Thank you.
Thanks, Kai. Shake your hand.
So maybe can you guys,
We're gonna get a picture.
you guys stand up here, and we'll, and the board, school board, maybe come around for a quick photo?
Or you just squat down here. We're all gonna go back to work right after, right? No. Yeah,
We got the call back.
just about.
Yeah. Everyone can see?
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Great.
All right,
Thanks,
thank
Kate.
you. Next one I had was open forum. I did not see anyone on the signature. Does anyone think we do not have open forum tonight. So just a reminder for those of you watching remotely, you're welcome anytime to come. You do have to come now that we're back in person and declare your name and the topic, and then we'll give you around about 5 minutes to discuss what you'd like to share. So welcome any month. Please do come. We are on to item 7, approval of our minutes. So we have 2 topics here for this one. For 7A, we'd like to just quick discuss, there was a request to amend a vote that we had recorded in the minutes, and the vote amendment was shared 7AI, small I, and basically just saying we want to make sure that we're compliant with all of our rules and regulations, and so the vote would like to be changed from I think a 4 to an abstain, correct? So I guess then what I would propose is that we discuss and approve the August minutes from August 15th. So can I get someone to make a motion to approve those with the amended changes?
I'll motion to approve the August minutes with the amended changes.
I'll second that.
DJ seconds. And the only other discussion I was going to make mention was the workshop. We need to, I noticed that we didn't have, so we moved to discussion quick. We did not have notes from the workshop last, and I think it was because we were kind of in the middle of changing who's recording and whatnot. DJ, are you clear? Is that coming from or is that, like this week I think we're generally good. We can talk about this month, we can talk about data privacy. But if we need to record notes,
I took it last month, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I took it as Ian would be working on the actual agenda, taking notes from our meeting, and
not the workshop.
Yeah, the workshop would not be something that she would be necessarily taking notes for. So I kind of felt like that would be the secretary's role,
So I kind of feel that too, but that was not the deal that we made last month.
No.
So I wanted to make sure that we're clear. Are you okay to do that? Not to put you on the spot.
No, I was thinking about that as we were getting our information from data privacy, that would be the nuts and bolts of what those minutes would entail.
Okay.
Would be sharing of that information.
So I think in the future then we should have just a little blurb of that. Normally what I would do is when it came to the chair's report, I would just make mention for kind of public record, so it's kind of captured there too. Okay, good. Any other comments, questions, errors that we saw?
I'd like to go to the August meeting minutes.
Sure.
Looking specifically at 14B, the motion to post an intern position until seated in June. I don't think that clarifies what was actually motioned. I'd also call for it to be rescinded as well, and the fact that conflict of interest in the sense that the board voted upon it the month prior, and discussion was brought up against this motion by somebody who voted against the motion, or against the original motion in July, and it was supported by members who were not in attendance during that meeting.
I think I'm just going to do a quick procedural check. So I think the question on the table right now is, does this capture what was said then? And then what we could do is we could have another further discussion as a board if there's concern about things. Does that make sense? It's a slight difference in my mind.
Further discussion.
So like if we wanted to talk more about, we're talking about the interim position that we said goes through June of next year, right? And so if we wanted to talk more about that, then we can or should put that on the agenda that we just did on item 4, where we could add another topic to talk about that. Does that make sense?
This month's current agenda, item 4.
Sorry, approval of the agenda was item 4, and now we're approving the minutes. So the question of whether the minutes captured correctly what we did last month is what we're talking about now. And then if we want to do anything different, do I see that right? Are you guys?
Yeah.
And I know we're all just kind of feeling out the process here, but I want to, if that makes sense. So I think what we're trying to say is, did this capture correctly? Sometimes we miss things. We got a wrong vote, or we got a wrong name, or not exactly what the person said was captured. That needs to be corrected. But if this was what happened last month, then those notes are correct. And then I think what your question is we'd like to have more discussion about what was decided. Is that what you're saying?
not what, but how it was decided and how it was brought up. It's a procedure thing.
Okay.
In accordance to what I've been reading through our packets in the tenets and structure of meetings and stuff, it just seemed like how that was brought up and put into that agenda is a violation of that.
Okay.
Sorry, can I ask for you to restate?
Restate what I just said.
Yeah. in
So
the
as I'm
beginning.
reading through the tenets and the standards for the school board, as well as the school board leadership guidelines, a lot of what they're stating in here about making decisions and moving forward from decisions, it sounded like there was some conflicts of interest and conflicts of how that was brought to the table again. After a previous meeting, it had been voted upon that all members would be seated regardless of any stipulation. And then when it was brought up at the second meeting, it was brought up by an individual who had voted against it and was supported by individuals who were not in attendance at that meeting.
Okay, so when we look at the August minutes, that's not reflected in there, what you said,
The
right?
second part, no, but the way this is worded, it says motion to post the interim position until seated in June.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Should that be restated somehow, or what would you like?
I think it should be because, well, actually, what I'm saying is I feel like it should be rescinded. I feel like that motion should be taken off the table because of how it was brought up and conflicts of interest that were presented with it. However, if it's going to stay in the minutes, it should be more specific than that.
Maybe it needs to be reopened for discussion.
Yeah, and it's a good question. So I guess
Change.
I'm trying to think.
For accuracy.
I like, if that was the motion, which we could go back to YouTube and see what it was, but if that was the motion, I feel like that's correct. Then the next question is, was that in error? Which is what we were trying to do in August, I believe, was the previous July one was in error. So we reviewed it again with new knowledge in August and came to this conclusion. If we say that again is an error, I'm totally fine with it, no one's perfect, but then we'd have another discussion in the agenda, not approving of the minutes. That's the only thing I'm saying. And I'm fine if we want to have another discussion. I would just open that up after we approve these minutes, to go back to item 4 again and see if we can amend it. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're saying the same thing, just a different way. So, okay. So any other good point? Any other questions? Yeah.
There's also, well, the information is incorrect. There was a previous instance where Adam Bartz left and therefore he didn't leave, he filled a position that someone else left. He fulfilled the rest of that.
Yeah.
Of that person's, I can't think of the word.
Role.
Term, role,
yeah.
thank you, sorry. So he wasn't the one who left. I don't know how picky that is, but just,
Well, we should
that's.
correct it if it's error.
Yeah.
Okay. So, 2 amendments. One is the vote should be turned to abstention, and the other one should be where Adam filled a role that was left.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you want to change the motion to seat an interim position? Does that make more sense to you instead of post?
Yeah, I think
That's more clear with what I thought we did.
To
Yeah.
seat
Yeah.
an interim position until seated,
Okay.
until a new election, really. And then they'd be seated in June.
Yeah,
Because
it should
what
be,
this
it should
means is
be,
that the seat's not being filled.
Correct.
It's just empty
To
right now
seat.
until June. That's how this reads.
yes, it should be
Right,
two
Yes.
seats.
it makes it look like it's posted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm fine to change it to seat. Yep.
So I'm seeing 2 changes in the minutes.
Yep.
One is the change of an abstention vote in the earlier, and then changing post to seat.
Yeah.
With a little other verbiage there to make that.
Can we say motion to seat an interim position until a new election in June or something like that? Or is that
I
too?
believe that was the intent.
That was the
Yeah.
intent of it.
Yeah, that's what we voted for.
DJ, did you capture that? So we're changing post to seat
Yep.
and interim position until a new election seats seated in June, something like that.
Was the Adam Bart's filled or was left?
For Adam Bell.
He filled the position that was left.
Yeah, another.
Filled an open
community member-
position,
other-
therefore-
Another community member.
So after Adam Bartz, instead of left, filled an open position and therefore was an interim until the vote was conducted.
I didn't think it was Adam, I thought it was Sandy.
No, this is,
Or there were
Well,
two.
the instant, yeah, this is a different instance.
Actually, Adam just, he had the seat until the term expired.
Right.
He wasn't reelected, or
No,
he didn't.
run, yeah. He filled the position when the other person left for,
Until the
until
term
the end
was
of the
up.
term.
But
At the
He was a
he came
community
in,
member.
if I recall, he came in for a board
We
approval.
had two candidates
Yeah.
come in and we voted just on
The board.
the other 8 members or whoever was there voted for an interim between, it wasn't a full election, it was just an election of the board members.
That's right.
So it was an appointment.
It was an appointment of a full appointment, I guess, until the term expired.
DJ, you get
Yeah.
that?
Adam filled the seats until an interim position was seated.
No, he was the,
As
he finished
interim.
as the interim until, to fulfill the, to fulfill until the end
Oh,
of
we
the
never, I don't
term.
think we ever used the word interim, it was just, he was seated until.
He was
the
seated
term.
until, for the remainder of the term.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be a conflict? That's a first position. That's a first position.
Okay, any good clarifications, anything else?
So what was the change on the first part about the CP? Could you read back the first change that you made?
DJ, you want to read what you got? Please.
Back up, that's on 4, correct?
We're talking about.
No, just, we made a change into the original.
The original motion to post the interim position until seated in June. And it's changed, what we'd like to change it to is a motion to seat an interim position until the next election.
In, it's almost like they switched post and seated. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, any other?
And just for clarification purposes, Adam filled the seat until completion. Okay.
Of the term, yeah.
Yeah. So would we call it an interim position, or would just he filled that seat until the end of that?
I don't believe we ever used the word interim, it was a full appointment.
Fantastic. No language in it. Thank you.
We'll call for a vote then. All those in favor with, I think, 3 amendments we discussed, say aye.
I
Opposed?
With the intent of the session later, or is that another motion?
We'll go back to that one after this. This aye. Opposed? Abstain? So we approve the agenda as amended. Then I'm okay to go back to
Sorry,
item
I have to
4.
abstain because it involves something that I asked for.
On item 4?
Yeah. To
Oh, yeah,
abstain.
okay, sure.
Maybe we
So
can break the motion.
8, 4, and 1 abstention, correct?
Well,
You want me to call
if
for
you
it again?
break up, yeah, I guess if we break it up, then I can abstain on the issue that I'm motioning for change on, but I can still
Vote for the
voice my
others?
issue.
Sure. So then we can take a vote on the approving the agenda with
So
the
should we
amended.
remove the original motion and re-motion?
Sure. Do we need to make a motion to remove it?
I think if you just rescind.
I think we
the
just-
So just a call for
Call for-
clarification from the chair,
Okay.
Call for what?
just clarification. from the chair.
Clarification. So, yeah, let me just clarify then. We're going to take 2 votes then. We'll take one with the first requested item 7AI, which is the changing of the vote to abstention, and then we'll take another vote with the 2 changes we talked about. So all those in favor of the first 7AI amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? So we have, vote passes 8-1 with 1 abstention with Heddle abstaining for the records. And then now we'll take a vote on 7BI, which is with 2 amendments in terms of the motion for clarification on what we felt we motioned for, and the other one just clarification on the wording for adverts. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? So that one passes 9-0. And then now I'd like to open up again the approval of the agenda and see if we can get a motion, assuming we can, to amend the agenda. And I would suggest, Wendell, we put it under discussion like 14E.
So I make a motion for discussion regarding 14PI of the August meeting to be added to discussion 14.
Yeah. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Any seconds, any other discussion?
Is this, so are we voting again or just discussing?
Right now, it's a discussion.
I'm fine discussing it, but I don't know if we have time to really get all the information we need to make a vote on it, so maybe we can discuss and vote next month.
I guess the point is, should we add it onto the agenda now and discuss? Because right, so that's the question to the floor. And, okay, so all those in favor of adding it to the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so we have 8-1. I believe I saw Jennifer abstaining, or opposing. So the motion passes, we will take it as 14E. Okay. Now we are on to student representatives, item 8. Now I didn't forewarn you of this, but typically you guys would be given a few minutes to discuss anything you'd like to share with the board or with the public. I put down 5 minutes, somewhere around about there. Okay, anything you'd like to share with them?
Me, I haven't actually really, I wrote a list down and I haven't really finished on some of the things, so I was waiting to address those on October's meeting. But something like really quick that I've that's just been brought to my attention. So this is my 6th year at MSA, and for a very long time now, it has to do with lunches. And high schoolers, until this year, high schoolers have always been in Building B. And, as middle schoolers, we always looked at the high schoolers in Building B lunch and be like, oh, it's like a reward to get to that point where you can go and play basketball and go and have fun. And, now, with us being in Building A, I feel like it's not, I don't know if it's working out well, just from what I've been hearing. One thing I know that one of the big reasons was that the little kids seem to be more rowdy, or they need to have time to get their energy out. But the thing is that the 8th grade, from 6th to 8th grade, they have physical education class, right? They have PE and they can get their energy out and they can do and have that time to run around and play and exercise. But us high schoolers, we don't have that in our schedule. We don't have physical education, and a lot of us, we want to be out there and we want to have fun and have exercise and all that time, because it is stressful time being a high schooler at MSA. That's like our little time of fun, and we don't have that PE implemented into our schedule. So. And it's always worked out every single year. So I just wondered why does it have to change for this year? And I don't know if it has to do with the more students or anything, but also just high schoolers, most of our classes are in Building C and D, from what I know. And I just from walking, I have almost all my classes. I have so many of my classes in Building C, and when I just have to walk back in between Building A and all that, and it might sound like I'm sounding lazy, but it just gets annoying when it's been going right for pretty much our whole entire time at MSA, and I'm just why does that have to switch up now? It's just what I've been asking, what other students have been asking, if anybody could answer. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. I think one of the things that's tough is if we have a question, for everyone, it's nice if we get a chance to kind of prepare too. So maybe, like in the future, sharing the concerns or whatnot, I think that's awesome, but it's not always easy. Same with open forum. If somebody comes with a concern, we maybe don't always have the answers to be able to share just then. But I think the nice thing about it is just getting that out there and letting people know, you're speaking on behalf of students. So what I think, the administration's pretty much all here. So they're hearing you say it in a public forum. So that's it's well heard. Thank you, and well articulated as well. Appreciate it. So, yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, so hi, thank you for having us here. I'm glad to be back here, especially after last year advocating for adding another student representative and having it successful. I'm glad that we have two of us here so that the entire student body is adequately represented. And I'd like to let you all know my priorities for the year as well as what's on the top of my mind. So with the investigation, I'm not satisfied with it because the report, not even a redacted version, has been released to students or families as well. So I feel with that not being sent out, or I feel there's not we haven't hit the full the highest level of transparency we could get to. So that kind of hinders our ability to form a plan to address what happened and involve everybody, so that to have a plan to address that, everybody needs to understand what happened. And that's just how I feel. And thank you, Mr. Rex, for emailing me back and letting me know about that as well. And my priority for this year as well, from what I've heard from other students as well, is that I wanted to work to ensure that student voice is very much promoted to a level past students working in the schools as an advisory within an advisory position. And I want students to be at within a position within all parts of the school where we're to a state of partnership, past students providing an advisory level. And I'd also like to, this year, my priority is to create an environment that is very racially inclusive, especially following the discrimination that was presented in the school about 2 years ago. And one of the important ones that I've heard from the students is that creating a productive discussion around the level of homework and making sure that it doesn't become stressful, but it's also providing a rigorous curriculum. And I would like to promote a discussion among students, parents, and families, and teachers, of course. And then from there, create a plan to address that. And I'm the co-president of the Student Action Group at MSA, so with that position this year, I'd really like to obtain amazing feedback from students by conducting surveys and focus groups this year. So my plan is to get back to everybody with a policy agenda by the October meeting, based off of the surveys and the focus groups that I've conducted.
Fantastic. I think I'm really happy to hear the feedback. I think you guys are going to make a super strong addition to the team here, so thank you for that. I think one thing that now that we've got you started, we can kind of work on together is as we form the next agenda, we can make sure that we cover some of these topics. Maybe not every topic in the first month, but we can pick and choose things based on priorities for you guys. So let's work together moving forward. So thank you. Next up is our executive director's report.
All right, well, there's three parts to my report. One is the dashboard, which was sent out, you see. I updated a little bit because some of the things from the previous month were actually had transpired. So we had Paula Forbes on here. We had special education training at our workshop weeks with teachers, so I updated that. So the Dell hasn't really changed a whole lot because all that has been addressed. Some of it's still in the works. So it's kind of a start and it's going to continue through. You're going to see that. We also have another day with Paula Forbes for all of our staff coming October 19th, which is on this diversity night. So that's coming up. Any questions on the dashboard at all?
What does it mean, yellow versus green?
Green means it's accomplished. Yellow means it's still in progress.
Visuals changed.
Yep, changed a little bit. So, okay. The second part is the executive director goals. I know we talked about that last month. So, if you pull one up here too. So what I did is a lot of our goals as a school are really based on the investigation. So I left a lot of it in because I'm gonna have to oversee that as, you know, as part of my responsibilities. So I kind of color coded it, so you'll see it. Actually, I added a couple columns into the original document that was brought to the board in June. I added a tactic column and I added a measurement. So what is the action item that we're gonna do to address that? And then what is the measurement? So I added that. So you'll see everything that's in, you know, of course, it's in the strategic priorities in our 3 areas. In purple is anything that's come from the investigation itself. So that's what you'll see, the items that are in purple are from the investigation. The blue are items that I've added, that I felt as an executive director were really important that I had for this year. I added 4 goals, and at least one in each of the 3 strategic priority areas. In the student success is the achievement, academic achievement. I think that's always important, that we're always looking for and how can we strive to do that. We've put a lot of things in place, as you'll see with MTSS, our PLCs, a lot of things that are working towards that academic achievement that will be going. Continuing the mission and vision, I added finances, as that's really huge as an executive director, is looking at how are we going to be continuing to be long-term financially sustainable. That stability, financial stability. So looking at that, adding that in there, how does our mission vision set like that? And then the organizational support, I added 2 in there. One is communication. We already had a communication, but that one was really based on the investigation. And communication goes much more beyond just that itself. So I added a little bit more in other areas than just the investigation. Support effective communication to all stakeholders of Math and Science Academy, maintain regulatory communication, implement multiple avenues of communication to keep stakeholders, develop open lines of communication. So I added another facet of that communication, and also with culture and climate beyond just the investigation itself, because it's not just that, there's lots of areas with culture and climate. So providing a safe, welcoming, respectful, and rigorous learning environment for every member of the school community, cultivating an atmosphere where children feel physically safe, emotionally. Some of it does overlap a little bit with the investigation, but it goes beyond that as well. So those are areas that I've added to it. So I don't know if you had a chance to read it, or any comments or questions regarding any of those goals or the goals overall. Yes.
Looking through this, I'd like to just draw your attention to the culture and climate one. You use the word rigor in there. And I advise that you just be very careful with that word, because that's got us where we were with the investigation.
Okay.
What defines rigor? What is rigorous? So if we're going to be lining everything with our mission and vision, maybe change that to it.
Okay, thank you.
I have one bit of input too. Fair and equitable curriculum and grading. Fair and equitable curriculum and grading.
Okay.
As it applies to all children.
In what area?
Literally across the board. From our math criteria to include, is it on there?
Well, no, he's asking like, because we
Or am I
have
going
that.
too far?
No, so like on the far left are like topics, so organizational support of MSA mission and vision. Is that where you think something like that should be listed on here?
We're under the student handbook.
Yep. Success for all students is up on the top. Like where would?
Success for all students.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So up there. So somewhere
Somewhere
under
okay,
success.
sure.
For all.
I
That's
wrote
what he's
that down.
asking.
This isn't the voted item, I'm just wanting to share it out so I can easily add those.
Or
items to
academic
it and
achievement.
change the record.
So
Thank you.
everything here is under success for all students. But yeah. So
This kind of fit what you're feeling as a board, or anything you'd like to see in addition to, or?
Well, isn't that basically inclusive curricula and instruction for all?
I think I read it from an earlier version, I can't find it now, but we had called out some specific classes that we're trying to help, make sure we're not challenged or heavy. That was changed?
I kept everything that was in the original and I added to it.
Added to it, okay.
So everything that was in there prior in
Okay.
June is still in here.
Okay.
It's just, it's in the purple areas. So I kept
The
everything.
purple
else.
was the old one?
Yep, and then I added stuff to it that I felt was important to do in addition to. So I didn't want it to be all just based on investigation, there's other things that we need to do.
Sure.
Like the financial stability
Yep.
and some of those other areas as well.
We'll add some of that stuff to the finance committee.
So when you made these revisions, when I was reviewing the annual report, there was a much longer document on strategy. We have all these lists. I want to make sure that as we kind of bring them in or funnel them in, that we're kind of focusing on the right things and the things that we're going to do this year versus later.
Right.
So, is that what you, I mean, I know you started with even a different document from that, but would it be fair to say that, you've kind of gone through the strategic other strategies and that other document to make sure we've captured everything?
And a lot of this goes to, like, for instance, our authorizer goals.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to have 18 different sets of goals, so all of it kind of encompasses the goals that we're working on, that it's in here. Like the academic goals that we have with our authorizer, that should also be in my goals as well. So I didn't want a whole bunch of different sets of goals, that they all are kind of one and the same. So
I mean, I like this because the other list was so long and, just went all over the place. I couldn't figure out what we were actually trying to prioritize. And that's why I do like this better, because I think you've seen all those documents and incorporated into this, so. Okay.
And then the last thing was, the committees. You remember last month we talked about in the 3-ring binder, we had a piece on our committees. So what I did is the 2 changes on that document, I added the subcommittees on there, which is our
Election and personnel?
Yep, election and personnel. The personnel is the one who evaluates me, so it's kind of an ad hoc, right, it's as needed. And then the election, same thing. As we get close to election, that committee is a subcommittee of the board. So I added those 2 on there. And then I did revise the purpose of the governance to include the policy part, because we mentioned that last month, so I added that in there. So the purpose of the governance is, the governance committee is responsible for maintaining proper board composition, ensuring that the board governs effectively. This committee drives a comprehensive board self-assessment process, fosters development of new and existing board members, and reviews and assesses new and existing policies or governance procedures, and makes recommendations to the board of directors. So revise that to include the policy piece, and then added the subcommittees. That was the only difference.
Great, I was just checking, we did get the website updated with the new ones. I think that looks good to me for governance, so maybe we can just link that,
Sure.
the purpose. Yep, awesome.
And then one other thing I want to bring up, I think I had it in my board executive director report, was that it's coming close to our give to the max. It's coming up. So usually we run fundraisers, we want to tie it to something because it's usually an emotional appeal. So one thing that the admin staff of our team is looking at as far as what's a big need is transportation. And what I mean by that is we have, activities for students, but it is hard to get a bus. Really hard. I mean, for one, we have a bus driver shortage. So it's been really hard to get a bus, not just for athletics, but also for drama or music or whatever when they're going to want to play anything, any activity. So, and when we do get a bus, the cost for the bus has almost tripled from 3 years ago. It's over $1,000 per bus ride. So what we'd like to do is look into purchasing a couple 15-passenger vans for MSA. Our parents that we've heard from would be ecstatic because now we have that option to be able to transport. And so we would like to, from the board to give us permission to go ahead and start investigating what that would be. We looked at, how much it would be to get one. I've already talked to our insurance as far as that part of it, but they know more details like a VIN number and stuff to get that, and the parameters of who drives. But I think it would be beneficial to our students, our staff that do oversee these programs, but also for our families as well. it's really challenging for a lot of our families. If there's a soccer game, they have to take off of work, come to school, pick up their child, bring them to the soccer, that's kind of been going on if we can't find a bus. And
Sorry, I was gonna ask a question. With the busing, is it possible, because I know something that like the girls basketball team was trying to do, is it possible that we could do fundraisers for busing, or is something given to the max donations, something that could be put towards busing, and how would that work?
And that's kind of what we're trying to do here, Joseph, too, is that if we can put just a couple vans and we can address it for all of our families.
I think fantastic opportunity for us, right? It's also something very tangible, like you mentioned, for the Give to the Max. Just out of curiosity, what is it, 50 grand or 100 grand? or what is-
47, 48.
For two?
Yeah, with
Or
all
for
the-
one?
Each one is like 50,000.
If you can-
But if you think of the average cost of a new car is now over
Yeah, sure, I was just
45,000.
curious.
So,
So, and then, you guys can help us manage that. I mean, what's the typical Give to the Max donation? How much do we normally give? What, back in history when we used to do it?
how much is the total?
Yeah, what do we normally give a year?
I think it's usually around 50,000.
So,
But we
maybe
would
a van?
probably, like finance plans and then pay them. now.
Sure,
We
sure,
would
okay.
Use that
We
money.
can put the money towards probably paying off one or.
Yeah, that's great.
or something like that.
Great.
We used to have a committee for fundraising. We dissolved it, so I guess this also fall under finances then?
There is a committee, it's just not a
Oh.
board committee.
Oh, it's just not another.
It's
I think that was one of the reasons why we did.
Oh, is that what we did?
It was
Okay.
admin, it's
Okay.
an admin task,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
that we can help with, but it's an admin responsibility.
So
yeah.
if we, it's usually, the Give the Max really started beginning of November, so that would give us a chance to come back with the information to the board, and, yeah. it'd be
Yeah,
nice to
awesome.
get that going, so I
Exciting.
think it'd be great for our school.
And I think to your point, Joseph, the problem is not necessarily just don't have funds to get buses, we can't get
Yeah, that's
buses,
true.
you can't get them.
And you said like, to get vans for MSA, would those have to be purchased, right? And do you know like roughly like an estimate like of how much we probably need to get like a good amount?
We probably need pretty close to $100,000 to purchase two, but we can leave, finance them. Because what we're paying for a bus would make the payment for one time almost, it's ridiculous.
And does 30, another question, I guess you guys know better, but with 30 people, because 15 person, does that cover most of our needs for this after school?
It will, yeah, because a lot of times it's like a cross-country team. The cross-country team has right around 30 members that
Okay.
need rides to.
I mean, I think that's fantastic.
Or the Nordic ski team. same
If you
thing,
could pull the
basketball
kids
teams.
and they don't show up
A lot
later
of
or whatever.
times, yeah, a lot of times on our way, like for our basketball team, they're 250 passenger van will cover most of the team.
And unlike a school bus where you need a whole special set of
CDL.
driver's licenses and stuff, you don't need that. We will need to have some qualifications for our
Right.
insurance company, but the actual driving of it, anybody with a driver's license.
Then we have to go through the background check for that, because I believe the first.
So you'd like to come back with, here's what it would cost,
Yes.
sort of thing, and then we, okay.
Thank you.
I have some questions, but also them to you. We don't need to.
Okay, sounds good.
I would also add in there that these would be driven by coaches and staff. Just so
Yeah,
that
parents,
since
they
it's
said,
parents,
yeah, not the night that you did come, but staff, coaches, yes. And as long as their driver's licenses, clean, everything.
There'll be some procedure,
And
yeah.
it wouldn't be limited to athletics either. I mean, this could be to robotics meets, this
Sure.
could be to.
And your field trip, that's a small.
Yeah, I mean, this is for all activities,
It's awesome.
not just athletics. This is something that we want to take advantage of and we have a need for.
We can talk about the equitability of
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
We have parents that can't get on board with these, so it's not being a bus ready for them, whereas some kids can still ride with parents.
I also know there was a time, I think, there was concerns about letting parents drive not, like kids that weren't their own. There was a legal case about that, and then we were working on a policy for that, and then the red lines came from the state that it was fine. Or the case was settled or something, so. But having alternate transportation where parents don't have to
Wendell brings up a great point. We may have students that aren't participating in extracurricular activities because their parents are dependent on the school bus to bring them to the school. And they don't participate because they don't have a means to pick them up.
So would they bring them back, would they bring them back to the school then, and then they can be collected?
Yeah, so they would be housed at the
Okay,
school, so.
perfect. Anything else from your side?
So one comment as you research this, just to follow up on what Cody said, a couple of years ago, we looked at, it was a different issue. It had to do with, carpooling, parents sharing, parents driving, students that were not their own. And even with the lawsuit being settled, there were like 2 or 3 lawsuits at the time that were that close to being settled. They were settled. I mean, they were multi-million-dollar cases nationwide, and they were the weirdest facts you would ever look at, but people interpret it as in, we don't even want to go there in terms of having other people drive other people's kids, period.
A lot of it had to do with for one version it was like insurance coverage.
Well, it is insurance coverage, getting it or how they would be covered. So just look into it. Things I'm sure have changed since then, but oddly enough, it was probably more important than the actual cost of the vehicles. Is having, would they have to sign waivers, and all it would take is one suit and the school would be crushed. So
That's why we're working with our
yeah. So
Thank you. That's it for me.
I will move us to the chair's report, and what I would like to cover is already in the agenda, except for our workshop where we covered the what we're calling data privacy. So the board has now been trained as of today on how we handle information and information requests and all the different kind of nuances. There's a lengthy package you guys can read at your leisure, but the bottom line is it's very important that we follow these rules so that we keep the school in check, and then any information requests that you guys receive would make the most sense to go to our executive director. If you have any questions, you can follow up with me to just to make sure that we're following everything correct. That's all I wanted to share for this month, other than I'm super excited to have a full board back in place again, so thanks for everyone stepping up on that one. Board committees. So normally how we go through the board committees is you guys have a chance to post your notes and read the notes. So instead of going through everything that we did, I would ask that we just do the more lean principle, or if you have any specific questions, we go through that way. So I'll start with governance, and any questions is fine. I do have a separate update under the DEI section on the bylaws, so that's mainly what we talked about. And policy, we're not doing anything with just yet, but eventually we need to get a, so if anyone is interested in helping us with policies, please see me, we'll get that sorted out. School expansion, any questions, or any questions for governance?
So back to governance on your notes,
Yeah.
your 4th bullet point said the group reviewed the document and provided comments. I don't think we had a chance. Part of the conversation was comments were made on an older version of the bylaws, so we talked about that, but in terms of providing comments specifically on the edits that were suggested, I don't think we had a chance to dig into that.
You're right, I think comments is more general.
Generic, yeah.
Not a specific comment, yeah. Good point. Other questions? Then we'll go to expansion. Any questions for Jeff?
So same with you, I mean, we have a little discussion section a little later, so I can cover more of the details then.
Sounds good. Finance, we do have to take a pause here, so for finance, Cody, you want to help take us through A, B, and C?
Yes, so we met last Monday. If you guys read the minutes, there were a couple errors found on the financial reports. They have been updated, and the reports given are the ones with the updates. Thank you, Kate. Kate caught a lot of them. Any questions on any of that? And then I'd like to make a motion to approve the finances for August.
Second.
Jeff seconded. So any further discussion? The only thing was just an overall comment that we had, our expenses are a little bit higher now, but we did a few bigger things, right? So eventually that's gonna kind of slow down, like some construction, some.
So, one of the errors was with the percentages. So if you look on, starting on page 8, the last column is the percent of our working budget. 8 is our revenues, and then after that is our expenditures. Some of them, so we're 17% through the fiscal year. Some of them are much higher than that, like capitalized software and technology. That's just basically that money was spent in the summer to get ready for the school year. That's when most of the expenses happen. Some of the curriculum, like if we bought textbooks over the summer, that might be really high. So some of those expenses we expected to be like spent a lot in the summer and then not so much throughout the rest of the year. So that's not really alarming to us, but.
So I don't want to make it more granular than it is, but like I'm used to kind of seeing budgets where, you know, like the summer budget is such, so we spent that. You know what I mean? Then it's not a difference, whereas we're saying we're annualizing whatever that number is, which we happen to spend in the summer. So then it looks crazy in the summer, and then the rest of the year just keeps going down. So I'm not saying we need to change it, but we could also consider something like that. But if this is the financial way to.
Well, we do have a cash budget.
But I'm saying instead of dividing the number by 12, we know we spend this in the summer. You know, we could almost put it in the summer budget.
We may be having an ongoing summer school, so maybe that's.
And it'll start catching up, because we also
Yeah,
need staff
it's
in
fine.
August, even though school doesn't start till September. So they'll catch up. Jenny said usually around October, she kind of balances out.
Yeah.
Other questions for the budget or the finance?
I think you explained that in the initial opening of the report.
Yeah, that we're 17%.
Right? Yes, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think that explanation as a key point really helps.
Yeah. Okay, all those in favor of approving? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Approval 9-0 of the, what do we call those? Financial report? Yeah. All right, we had nothing in the consent agenda. With anything else supplemental? Cody, are you good?
Nope, that's.
Sorry about the.
Okay. Yeah.
So in the bylaws draft, it says that there could be from grades for the student representatives, they could be from 6 to 12, but in the approved motion, it was from 8 to 12.
Good question. So in the draft, and that's a little bit of what Jeff was alluding to, we had a draft that we had intended to discuss, but I'll talk about what happened at the meeting at the next one on the bylaws. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So hold up for just a couple more points. Good question. So nothing for consent agenda. The diversity, equity, inclusion section, we had two things. The first one's a dashboard update. The second one is your question to discuss. So I would say on the dashboard update, I had only one change on the dashboard. I didn't include it. I should have included it. But basically, we had our first staff and the board also invited session with the diversity inclusion training. That was a couple of weeks back, I think, with Paula Forbes here in Great Hall. And then we also agreed to set up our board training in the next two workshops. So not this workshop, which is data privacy, but the next two will be with Paula Forbes. So I feel like I changed that one to kind of on track because we know what we would like to do and we're kind of doing that. So I changed that from a yellow to green. That was the only change this month. But next month I'll try to remember to paste the dashboard again with you guys. So that was where we're at with that. There are, we still have a number of items that we need to kind of keep after on that. The bylaw discussion is the next one. So we had a governance meeting, and I think it was great. We had a few new people show up. So the discussion started with the draft that we had discussed as the board, together with the authorizer, together with the lawyers, and how we wanted to change it. The discussion evolved into kind of the next level up, which is to say, what is it that we want, the bylaws to be? And that question is a fair one. The question was pointed out, like, we keep changing our bylaws, and I think 14 times in 20 years, thereabouts. So it's plus the original. So I mean, if you think about it, we revised our bylaws almost annually for the last period of time. And I think it's a fair question to say, is that the right philosophy, right? Or should we have a little bit more general bylaws that govern and allow the board to do board stuff and keep it as maybe only egregious things need to be covered in bylaw changes, not every little thing that we come up with every year. So I think that's a fair question and critique. So actually Hedel is a great addition to our team. She did some homework here. We've just got recently where we've got the original bylaws that was set up for the school. We have some comparable bylaws from other comparable schools. And I think what would make a lot of sense is that we take those things and take the governance board, governance committee, review those ones and come back with a proposal to the board and say, okay, yeah, we have the reviewed one that we're kind of carrying down the same path, but maybe we take a time out and just look at a few different pieces of information, come back to the board. So what I want to be clear is we're not dragging our feet, we're trying to do it right. We're trying to do this right. So for those of you who are concerned that the board's still not doing what we need to do, we are doing it. We're just trying to make sure that we don't just jump to something, that we do it right. So please be patient with us as we have maybe one more round where we go through some of these examples of how other schools have treated it, where it looks like they didn't necessarily change their bylaws nearly as frequent as we have. And let's see if we can't come somewhere in the middle or adopt that model or whatever, but we'll come back with a recommendation. I think, Jeff, you were there, does that sound about right? So, Jeff, you're right, we didn't get a chance to go through the specific questions. Your question was on 6 through 12, 8 through 12. It was for discussion. So you have the one that's official, which I think is 8 through 12 now. I think that's the official one. And discussion point was just opening to 6 through 12, but we never got that far to the side of this. Okay, so, because there's pros and cons. Last time we discussed, there were some concerns. If you're too young, could they still contribute? The counter side of it was, but that's our middle school, and that makes up a big portion of the school, so wouldn't that be great? So I can see both, and we need to decide on that one.
The 8 to 12 passed.
Yeah, 8 to 12 I think passed in April or whenever our last revision was thereabouts, and I think to Jeff's point, we've changed it so many times, it's sometimes hard to even find the latest one to work off of again, so.
Because the draft hasn't reflected that.
Yes, and I think there was some misunderstanding or miscommunication when that draft was pulled. I was editing probably an older version. I didn't get the most recent one pulled out. So, yeah, and I think it was because that one was PDF and we have to find the Word one, something like that. So I think more to come on the governance piece. So questions for that? Is that anything else you want to add, Heather?
Yeah, I think maybe if we just restate what the committee is being tasked with in terms of the bylaws, it might help keep the minutes clean and everybody up to speed. So the committee is going to, and correct me if I'm wrong, the committee is going to review various samples of bylaws and governance practices of fellow Minnesota charters in an effort to align MSA's bylaws with Statute 124E. And that's what we will come back with.
I think that sounds good and it's more concise and clear. Any questions or anything to add? I guess we're asking the board, for those who are sitting on the government, anyone's welcome and able, the public also is very much welcome to sit in and help us with this, but anything else you'd like for us to look at? Teresa? No? Good. And that's the diversity, equity, and inclusion for this month. How are you guys doing? Do you need a break, or can we keep going? The next section. You okay? Okay, let's keep going. And so let's move on to item 14, which is discussion. We had budgeted around about an hour for this, but let's see how it goes. So we have the annual review of 413 harassment policy. Harassment and violence, policy on harassment and violence. I didn't see any red lines. So does that mean nothing changed?
No, I haven't seen any changes that have been changed with MSBA or any other recommendations. So sometimes these policies just kind of
just carry on.
I haven't seen anything.
So then I guess
So,
the question,
the only suggestion, actually two, is on most recent policies, did we change the language from director to executive director?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we may want to kind of review that. And also on page 7, we may need to redesignate Mr. Vetch as the human rights officer because it still lists Mr. G.
Okay.
But I think you're right, the rest of the policy remains the same. It's just the small updates.
With that, on number 7, I don't know if we need to be naming someone by
Name a
name.
position.
Or the
The position
position,
would be-
so would we
Yeah,
have
because
it?
we've made that slow transition to stop naming
Maybe.
specific
That's
people,
good.
so.
just executive, MSA executive director,
Yeah.
yeah. that'd be great. Do we then take the phone number and email off as well?
Well, no, because actually when you list someone, you probably have to give notice on how to contact them.
So what I'm wondering is if you say executive director, no name, you got the school, the address doesn't change, and then you just
Do we have
put a
a
school phone
generic?
number, yeah,
Yeah.
generic school phone number.
But I mean, do you have a generic email address, it's something executive director at MS?
Unfortunately, there's not.
No.
We have info at.
Yeah, but we don't want to set something like human rights.
No,
violation
that
of
probably
women.
should.
Right, it falls through the cracks, good point.
That's true.
Maybe we need to have a specific email just for those types of issues.
Well, either way, you've almost talked yourselves into naming a specific person.
But we could, I mean, it's a pretty
Unless
easy
it's-
ask,
I can ask
sorry,
Justin to just set up
to
one.
get an executive director, because
Justin
I have a board chair one, which will go
Oh,
to the
yeah,
next
that's
board
true.
chair, right?
Right.
Well,
That's true.
my suggestion is we have like
Executive
a
director at MSA.
human rights or human, something specifically for that type of complaint.
That, the only thing I'm wondering is if we put executive director, we could use that for other policies too, to where we need to list the executive director.
Okay. I had some questions and concerns as I was looking through it. Maybe just a little history on it because it's also been revised quite a bit, but yet it states that it's an MSBA model policy. Some of the changes I understand with, the progressive expansion of definitions, but does anybody know the history on the adult non-student? Are we offering protection and taking responsibility for just even visitors on our campus and not just the protected classes that this policy applies to? There's this adult non-student interjected, which is a change from the standard form.
Yeah, I don't remember why.
Oh, it's throughout the document.
Yeah. And most of the changes, I mean, and this pertains to a lot of the other policies, is if a particular policy gets changed a lot, it's changes made by the MSBA that we've adopted, rather than us reviewing each policy to make additional changes. I'm not saying that's the case in all of these, but,
Well, adult non-student is not,
well, it would be something we would come up with.
I think it is something that,
So the
Came
MSBA
up with.
might have some history on that.
I did look,
Nothing?
nothing.
What page are you talking about?
It may have been from the old template policy, I don't know.
Investigation, this is student.
It looks like local commission was another added. We added that as a class.
Which one, sorry?
Activity on a local commission. Membership or activity on a local commission, we inject adult non-student. We state that we will. My question is adult non-student.
Well, if it's not in the statute, maybe we should take it out.
Yeah, or I thought, maybe somebody knows the history on that protected class of person.
So is that like-
We're gonna have our governance committee be looking at policies, is this something we, bring to that committee?
Yeah, so I think we have a hole right now on our board where in the past we'd have somebody specifically tasked to go through and come back with the red lines from the MSBA. On this one, we're not doing that just yet. So I guess if you want this as the first discussion, you can't approve it. You normally would approve it the next month.
And we can bring it to the vote.
Yeah,
Policy
sure.
and start working on it.
Patel,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it's referring to people in a position with like an office manager or para, because I don't think they're listed
Well,
as.
that's listed, that would be included as MSA personnel, is what I thought. Local commission is also something that's been added. That's not, standard MSBA. We also do not provide, we need to state somewhere that oral reports are okay. We need to welcome oral reports. That it does not have to be in writing. That although you can use Form 413, that maybe it doesn't have to be required. Like sending an email in is completely sufficient. Then on page 8, everything from F through N is just things that MSA has added. Use of formal reporting forms is not mandatory, which is great. Okay, I missed that.
I think that's maybe where that oral report can come in.
And then also under investigation, I did notice that MSBA states that it'll immediately, but we state that the investigation will occur in 3 days. So do we really want to deviate from, how much do we want to deviate from that standard form policy? Especially if it's not going above and beyond.
That's
Well,
what
and
I'm
then G-
suggesting, maybe bring this back to the policy committee or governance, and let's look at the policy itself,
Yeah.
instead of making all the changes here.
Yeah, so I think that's a good suggestion. If we could add 2 topics. One is the bylaws, and then the next one is maybe some recommendations on this 413.
So are we shifting from having a policy committee to that being part of governance too?
They're
We used to have
definitely, they're definitely
It is.
interrelated.
Okay. That's why when I talk about the committees, then our purpose is changing.
Okay,
That
I
governance
just
is
want to make sure
taking
that's
on
clear.
that piece of it, yeah. I think that makes more sense, just look at it really, make sure it says what we want it to say.
Yeah, and in the future, I think the comment was made last month that maybe it doesn't make sense to have me there also, just as the board chair, but because then if you are in charge of governance and the board, that could be a conflict of interest perhaps. So something for us to think about if somebody wants to raise their hand and take over leading that committee. That could make sense, but I know we had someone in there before and they had to step off, so I'm kind of feeling that void for now, but it's
I think we're
open.
missing a step here, because usually the policies come through our policy committee.
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
coming to the board.
That was one of our, like the policy committee, because certain policies we renew every couple of years. And they were like looking at that language where we use executive director and instead of naming someone specific, having.
Right now, they're in every year at a specific month, they just were part of that agenda, so I think that's, you just get forwarded through every month at that time. I think it's good, it goes through a policy committee, and they can start addressing all those concerns, whatever we need to do, more changes need to be made.
Yeah, it's a little easier if we have like half a dozen red lines to comment on, and then if we catch some things that don't make sense, we can discuss things. Instead of finalizing the policy here.
So that we're acting as a policy committee.
Yeah, correct.
Right? Yeah.
So, any other things for the governance/policy committee to look at for this one? And had a lot, it seems like you got some notes, so maybe just bring those to the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Okay.
would be helpful.
Great, then I'll move to the annual report.
Okay, copy of the annual report is in your folder. This, it's kind of time sensitive. It gets, it needs to be at our authorizer October 1. But unfortunately, we can't bring this in August because a lot of the data we don't have yet. So it's kind of a short notice type thing. I know Cody said there's a few typos, so if you see some things, please let me know too. It's a lot of just, some information is consistent, but a lot of it's updated as some of our, this has a 1-year lag, since it's from last.
So
So should we just send you an
Data from the
email?
22.
I mean, like Cody, there were just a handful of places
Yeah.
where I think we meant to change the date 2021 to 22.
I might have missed it.
So we'll probably want to do a search.
I've
for
seen
that.
two.
Okay.
So,
And some of it
Yeah,
was
so-
intentionally 2020, 21, right? So the old board, the old admin, all of that, because it's last year's annual report.
Correct. It's 1 year lag, yep.
So those make sense, but there are other ones too, you're saying?
So like
Yeah,
the audit says FY '21 audit because that is correct. That one's on that list.
Yeah, that would be
So
right. 'cause
that
was
one's
in-
fine.
And I had someone proof it for me a couple of years ago, in the office, but I missed things, so.
yeah, things you might not even know. I think it listed me as being seated in 2020 and I was seated in 2021.
Oh, yeah, that stuff I wasn't sure.
Yeah, no. I'll send you an email.
Please.
But would this been your first seating, Cliff?
It specifically listed me for current as in 2021, 22, because this report covers that.
But the way I see it is it should have been what our 2020, 21 board was, right? So you.
Yeah, it says that, how it was worded.
Listed the.
Because I was, my
Stayed
gap was 2020 to 2021, is when I was on the
Okay.
board.
So then,
So it's reseated in 2021.
So June 21.
And then if you calculate 3 years from that, it's really
Okay.
2020.
It says it's a PDF, yeah, just email.
Yeah.
Go back to the board.
okay.
Little things like that.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
And double check that my comment is in fact right, because you're right, it's got that 1 year offset, and you always have to
It
think.
threw me off, yeah, when I
Yeah.
went through.
I think I was seated 2019,
You were last school.
June 2019. It was the school year COVID hit, which would have been,
Well, if it was fall of 2019 or spring of
Some of my
20.
kept because you were on it last year too, so I didn't change it because I figured those dates
Right.
were right. So,
and it may have been wrong the last year. No, because Dan and I started the same year.
Could have, because you were up for
Yeah, that's right.
election.
The first-
So we were both out for the election at the same time, so that,
Probably 19.
I'll email it to you.
So I guess then when it comes for approval, we need to approve it tonight, so we need to be.
Yeah, I mean,
we
these
need
are
just small minor changes like that,
typo
okay.
type changes.
Yes, if that's okay. But all the
The substantial is correct, yeah.
great results.
Is this where we had some of the world's best workforce results?
Some of it overlaps.
Yeah,
There are goals in the world's best, from the world's best workforce on here.
in the annual report, right?
Yeah, down towards the bottom.
Well, we can take it at that one too.
Yeah.
Any questions? Annual report?
For retention and all that stuff is of course, everything's
Great. All right, then we'll move to the world's best workforce. Next.
Do we
World's
need
best-
So we have a decision
Oh, you
coming, no,
This is-
item
yeah.
15.
Okay, so world's best workforce. This one is up for, it'll be, need to be approved. It's due to our authorizer December 15th and MDE on December 15th. So we'll have to have it approved in our November board meeting. But this is now when we get started on it because it's required that we have a committee. So what you'll see is there's an invitation that went out a while ago and I have, so the invitation went out to all of our families and to staff. Actually, we have a committee that's, our staff signs up for. So you'll see in the second one, a list of those administrators, staff, MSA staff, parents who responded, and 2 students. So you remember that are recently on this. So,
And parent as well?
yeah, and 4 parents. Actually, I have another one come in afterwards too. So.
Do you have enough? Okay.
I do.
Okay.
I do. Be nice to have another student, there's another one, so if you guys know somebody, we can have another student. And you can always recruit another teacher or staff member too, so that's enough.
Well,
We just
thanks.
ask from at least a member from these areas. So
This
that's
is-
what we're doing right now, and there's 2 meetings, you can see there's one in November, October and November.
I was just gonna say extremely important work. I think I like the aspirational goals that we had from before, disappointed that we didn't get there. I was looking at, was it 3.5%, no different, right, amongst our different classes and groups? that's great, but we're not there yet, right? So-
COVID hit, yeah.
You
You
think
know
COVID
what
is the
was
reason why we're here?
impressive was our, the biggest growth we had was from our black students from 1920 to 2021. I mean, it was huge growth, which was really impressive.
In
We're not quite at
population or the test?
The test scores.
Test scores,
Yeah.
okay.
So we're not there yet, the 3.5%, but we made a huge gain last year.
Okay.
That was huge. It's like over 15% increase from the previous year.
And it seems like, and you guys come back with the recommendation, but the aspirational goal should be no difference, no statistical difference, no matter the class, right? But I wonder if it was too much to ask for within a year to change a 20-point difference. I don't know.
Well, I know that 3.5% is like a 3-year goal.
It is a 3-year goal, okay.
Yeah, it is a 3-year goal. So over the 3 years, though, we'll get to a difference of
Okay. Thank
no
you.
more than 3.5%,
Thank
which
you.
is, that's a big undertaking.
All right, good.
It expires in 2023, so.
Questions on World's Best Workforce?
I have one question, just clarification. Is that AM or PM on the meeting dates?
PMs.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, thank you. Yeah. It's in the evening, they're virtual. And if a board member would like to be on this committee, please let me know, I'd be happy to. That might be one area to keep with.
Well, that's a good clarification. I know we do have some before school meetings that early.
Yeah, no, that's true, it could be. The email did have a PM on this.
Okay, can I move us to the new board member discussion section?
Do we normally vote on the annual report or no?
That's a good
That's
question.
in
I
December.
said
don't know if you
15.
did or not.
Oh, it is at 15,
Yeah,
sorry.
I think you did last year.
I feel better with that being approved. I feel like we have in the past, yeah. So, I have new board member discussion. So just a preface for this one, it was, we have, almost half the board is new. So without having discussions that are outside of a public forum, you know, we can do one-to-one questions, no problem, anytime. You guys got a question, and I know I've fielded a few. But if you have just a general, how does this thing work or how does that thing work, we try to capture it with a few different topics. One we know is a big one is expansion, another one is on governance, and then we left open any other questions. So I think, and some of it was starting to carry on over emails, and I just want to make sure that we, you know, if we start having discussions over email, that needs to be brought to the meeting. So let's just try our best to keep everything out that way, then we don't have to worry about that. So it's more of like open to you guys, it's the whole board can ask questions, but it was more to try to make sure that you guys are aligned with the public forum. So, starting with expansion, Jeff, I don't know if you want to.
Sure, actually, if you don't mind, I'll give kind of like the 5 minutes summary. We're in the process of trying to develop certain communications for all our stakeholders, including the board, and certainly for parents, and want to build something eventually onto the website, just a tab or whatever, so we can pull up some of this stuff. So what we did is we're collecting this information. It's on many different documents. We've had a number of meetings, and not everyone necessarily sees all the conversation going on. So like you said, it's a great time to bring everyone on board, and then you can ask specifically. And everything that, I didn't have a handout because we're still working on all these details, but eventually we're going to take this document, it's going to become part of our website on a tab, and then you can actually see how things are building out. So if you'll recall, I mean, Dan has talked about this, the topic of expansion has gone back a number of years. And for different reasons. I mean, part of it, a lot of it had to do with space. I mean, we always had the space, and this was before C&D were acquired, or at least. We're looking at space. And then part of the conversation then led on into, well, it's all about finances also, because we cannot continue to move along, build out, you know, increase the number of teachers and whatnot, when in fact, revenue is holding stable, but inflation is bringing up the costs. We couldn't, you know, increase pay as fast as we'd like, things like that. So the conversation actually started to meld together, and it really took hold last year. And towards the end of last year, you know, Dan was heading the expansion committee, and it's all these baby steps that you take, and finally, you know, we pulled the trigger. Pulling the trigger meant we start having conversations with people that can get us from point A to point B, that being thoughts of hiring architects, people that actually physically will help us move this project along. So the structure we chose, and there are different nuances in the structures, is bring on board an owner's representative. And they would specifically represent us and really do all the things that we wish we could hire another person with specific expertise to oversee the expansion. Because we could either hire a person on board to manage all of this. Problem is they wouldn't necessarily, they'd know about the school, but they wouldn't necessarily know about construction and expansion. So the first thing we did is, this went back to last May. We put out an RFP for people that would be interested in being our owner's representative. So that happened approximately in May. So we pushed pretty quickly. We hired 2 consultants just to help us put together that RFP. We put that document out there, and in June, we interviewed 4 firms. And the firm that we eventually chose is a firm called NTH. And we chose them, they were brought on early July. By the time we went through the whole interviewing process, negotiated the contract, around 7/1, they were formally brought on board. And if you'll recall, the part of was it the July meeting, we were negotiating the contract and some things were going back and forth. So that was the first contract that we really negotiated with substantial, right? This is substantial money in terms of how much we're paying them, but also they are going to be our representatives throughout the entire process. And one of the reasons we chose them, obviously they have great construction experience, but also on staff, they have a commercial real estate broker. And our decision is going to be stay or go, new building, refab an old building. Everything's on the table. So we needed someone that could handle all aspects of this. So they were brought on at 7/1. Around the middle of that month, they come here, it's our first meeting. We toured the place, we had opening discussions, and immediately, their next task is, you gotta figure out who the architect is. They weren't even on board for 2 weeks, and we decided to move that quickly. So the next piece of it, we sent RFPs at the end of July to architecture firms. We went through the same process, we brought them in for interviews, and it was close. At each level, we have met amazing people that could help us expand the school. And we ended up with a firm, Cunningham. We actually interviewed 3 firms. They all did schools. Oh my gosh. They showed us all their work. We try to expand the people that, Mr. Slatton was there for the interviews. We have these discussions. So Cunningham was chosen. One of the reasons they were chosen is we thought they were a great fit, not just for the design work, but now we're looking for fit. We're looking for fit in their process and how they're going to help us develop the mission and vision specifically for the building. And it sounds kind of odd because all the other places, they go, we want to know what you want. And they brought it down to, we're going to have exercises where we want to match your vision to your facility. So we've been working with them. They've been on board for a couple of weeks. Immediately we bring them to help facilitate and introduce themselves at the back to school night. So they've been with us for like 2 weeks, and that was their first task, to come introduce themselves and run those exercises. Now we've tasked them with helping us find a construction manager. Once again, 2-week turnaround, they send out an RFP. We're down to 4 that we're going to invite for interviews. That's going to happen this Friday. So we just had a meeting today, just look at their responses, and we're moving that much faster because now we know we're a little better about how we're doing and going through the interview process. Construction manager is a little more difficult because the people that have in fact sent in responses are all great. And we're not the ones that are going to be working with them directly. We'll actually be NTH and our architects. So we're relying heavily on them as to who they've worked with before, and so there's 2 huge phases. The first phase is going to be helping us make the decision on stay or go, develop the first renditions of the program to make that decision, and to develop a construction budget, the first shot at that. And it's all about estimates, right? It's all about working with them, figuring out what we want, but also plugging it in so that they give us the most accurate estimate possible, not some number out there that we can't rely on. Because concurrent with all that, Cody and Kate's been working with Jenny Abbs, Randy, we're developing the financial model. And the financial model is trying to figure out how much we can afford and how many students it will take, enrollment, to figure out what we can afford. And find that middle ground. We don't want to develop something that's going to take 3,000 students to pay for. So we have to figure out what that number is going to be. And right now, that's part of the discussion who we choose in terms of construction managers who can help us figure out that number accurately. And once again, develop what will be the first plan and drawings of what this might look like. Concurrent with all this, now we have NTH, commercial real estate. They're searching properties. They have been for 2 months, right, from the very beginning. And we have a committee, it's kind of like a, I don't know if you want to call it a steering committee, that meets with NTH for progress updates every week. So it's been, Kate, Randy, Dan, and times that you're in town, me, Diane Feeks. And we tried to keep it a small group. Part of it is we couldn't have a quorum of board members, of course. But there were really operational updates on a weekly basis. And then we have an expansion committee to help interview and whatnot. Of course, the board will make the final decision. So when we have all this information in hand, we're coming, I don't know if we have the actual date when we're going to have that first, great discussion within the board with estimates and whatnot, but it's probably going to be, I don't think it'll be October, it's probably November. Does that sound right, Kate?
There's still a process, we have to find out from our bond underwriter also how much our budget is. So we're working on models, then we can take that to we just started talking with an underwriter. They'll help us kind of figure out our number, then we'll have to take that number back, and that's part of why we're bringing in construction so early, so that they can build to a number, not build to a dream, and then start hacking off parts of the school later.
Yeah, our greatest fear is, dreaming about something we can't pay for, and then it starts getting chopped down. So we started to grab great ideas, and in fact, Cunningham is having its first workshop on, is it Wednesday, right? Wednesday, workshop number 1. So we asked for a sign up during back to school night. Everyone here, of course, is invited. The more people we can get, the better. We would love to have 30 to 50, people. It's going to be on Zoom, online. It's going to be run by our architects. They're going to have breakout rooms, and the whole idea for the first session is to develop that vision of what we're looking for. And they have 3 workshops. So each successive workshop will have assignments that we take out and back with us. And at the end of this entire exercise, it's going to take, I think, 4 weeks, and we have a break in between, is to come up with that vision of what this might be for us. And the vision, once again, is not what our building is going to look like specifically. It's going to be the feel of it, the attractions, all the specific, what needs for classrooms, programming, all those things that are going to get thrown into it. And they've already had, I believe, staff had their meetings. Boy, I can't believe how quickly it's already been last Wednesday, right? They've talked to every department, and they're, once again, looking for, and by the way, we always chuckle about this. It's not about how this school is short on everything. Like, gosh, I wish, why are we doing this, right? Cafeteria and all this other stuff. But it goes a few steps further. It's what do we want, within reason, but to achieve our mission and vision. It's really what it's about. So 3 workshops will be done by the middle of October. Program development, November, December, it's all going to collide together in terms of finances, vision, everything else. We want to make the decision of stay or leave, hopefully in November, December at the latest. The whole idea is to keep all options open and not forego an option because we're not moving quickly enough. So as you can see, we crammed a lot in the last 4 months. And these are some of the questions I heard during back to school, and for people that are listening in. When we work when we're looking for a vision, what we're trying to achieve, people have asked me, are we planning to stay in Woodbury? We would love to stay in Woodbury for so many different reasons. Busing is not the least of it, but we know who our current student population is coming from. So we're going to stay within 833. Woodbury and Cottage Grove are high on the list. We've not made a decision between stay or go. That's all part of the conversation, part of the analysis. And NTH, our owner's representative, they're supporting us in making that decision. Let's see what else. Other than that, I think that's pretty much the summary. We'll post this, you get to see all the detail. Like I said, a lot of the detail you don't have to worry about it, but those are the questions that we've been approached with up till now. So any thoughts, questions about the process, what we're trying to achieve, how we're headed?
I would just like to add just one comment. So I think you did a great job. Great summary, by the way. I think you boiled a number of years down in just minutes, so that's good. I think the main kind of push, if you will, is our mission and vision. I think you mentioned that. So I think we have our mission and vision, and we're saying we're struggling to meet our mission and vision, and one thing that we think we need is to expand. So I think you're right. We need to decide on expand to what, how many students is that, and what does that look like? We're still figuring that out. I think the one thing I want to be clear with all of you guys here as board members is, the board is not right now deciding, how that expansion happens, right? We're empowering this expansion committee to try to look at various different options. If it is X number of students more, what does that look like? They still have the mission and vision that they have to support. Small school field comes up a lot. How do you do small school field when you're expanding, right? It's a typical question. But I think they're still responsible for our values aren't changing, our mission and vision is not changing, right? All of these things. So I think you got it. I think it's just that in the coming months, the expansion committee will come back and say, this is how we want to execute against what you've asked us to do, which is expand the school, and it's going to involve these three pieces, either stay or go or what have you. How are we going to get the enrollment? How are we going to get the students? All of that needs to come back, to us so that and also the underwriters and the people who are going to put the money down on, on the bonds. There's got to be a story there, right? That says we believe we can get to X number of students. We believe in MSA because of the past. We believe we can get to these numbers because of these things. These number of students, right? I mean, we can't just say we're going to go from 500 to 5,000. I don't know that I would believe that, right? But there is some number there that'll be bigger than we currently are at, but we can't support it with that bid. So that's, I just wanted to.
No, thanks. And really just, for a point of information, our current buildings are on 5 acres of property. So I'll just leave you with that. You can kind of determine whether, it's best to stay or go based on that, but we know it's tight here. The other thing is, so next steps. You heard the next steps as in we're going to bring in a construction manager, we'll continue to develop budgets. A lot of it is we're going to continue gathering information, right? Competitive information, enrollment information, how do we fill the pipeline? All these things are nibbling around the edges now. How do we maintain a great organizational culture? How do we maintain success for all students? All those things that we'll have to continue to develop the data for. At the same time, we do everything else that I just talked about. So it's actually ramping up quite a bit more than settling down, at least until the end of the year. So if anyone would like to help volunteer and help do some of that work, right? Committees. And frankly, it's not just, you will actually help us on if you volunteer for all the other committees that we've been talking about, because this all feeds together into because we have to have all these things buttoned up as we grow, right? Governance, right? All these, bylaws and all these things. They have to be tighter than ever as we put together everything else to, double the size of the school, essentially. So please volunteer. Anything, everything. We'll always help. It doesn't even have to be specifically for the expansion.
Jennifer, you had a question?
Yeah, so in the past, there was like a wish list and then renderings. Is that in the past?
Yeah, just to give you a history on that. So we had a person come in, J.B. Vang, and his group, and he had helped us, actually gave us a lot of great information on how to pursue and how to, what steps we need to take. And at one time, I think it's a little over a year ago, he actually worked with an architect. I mean, it was just kind of like off the cuff. They threw out like a couple drawings that if we were to stay here, what might it look like? Beyond that, it wasn't because we're making any choices. It was just kind of a service that they offered just to show us what expansion might look like for us.
To build on that, Jeff, I think we took a number of students and then they calculated the square, the cube, right?
Oh, okay.
So it was almost like, what would a cube look like on our site? That's about as much as we did. No vision, not to belittle it, but it was really a quick one, like, can you fit that many students on 5 acres?
So you're telling me there's still opportunities to submit wish?
Oh, yeah, so we ran a couple surveys. You can help us. No, we ran a couple surveys, over the past year. So one of them was having those conversations about, our wish list. We sent that over to NTH and our architects, and that's additional information for them, combined with the workshops they're going to hold. So all this stuff is just kind of getting thrown into this mass of data and information, and now we just have to figure out what to do. And we'll continue to collect more. I mean, it has not stopped. And when they had the conversations with staff, that was one of the things, people piped up with exactly what was on their wish list and what was furthest on their mind. So even the back to school, I mean, no secret, all those little Post-its, everyone said, what? Cafeteria, right? I mean, that was it, right? We need a place.
We started we had a wish list meeting before COVID, I think.
Yeah, so it's been
then of course now with
It's been a long
COVID,
Right.
everything changed,
So, but they're bringing us focus. So it's less about what are the failings and negative things about our current building, and now they're kind of evolving us into the conversation of how can we make it the best possible school with newer and better resources. So,
I think, can I add?
yeah,
Point?
go ahead.
So,
please.
and Jen, anybody, if they are interested in participating in those workshops and we haven't captured you yet, email me, I will send out the invite. There's a Zoom link, you have to get the link to be able to
Yeah, I'd
join.
like to go.
But that is the best way to really help participate in some of these, the really early visioning and things that they'll for the design. So certainly anybody who's listening or anybody who's here, send me an email if you would like to participate.
And their request, if possible, is to have a lot of the same people go through all 3 workshops. They would love that. Now, is that realistic? We'll see. I mean, a lot of people have responded, but until people show up at the Zoom, it's just very difficult to tell. People are busy in the evenings. It's like 5:30 to 7:30 or 5 to 7. It's an interesting time for families. But even if you can't make that first one, there's no reason why you cannot continue the process and certainly participate in workshop number 2 and 3.
And Cunningham promises that it's very fun.
Yes,
So,
and they are a fun day.
Yeah, they are a fun group and they do have a real interactive activity, so it's not gonna be just you sitting there watching a Zoom screen for 2 hours.
Right,
and
right.
then-
At
so
least,
it is-
over half of it is going to be breakout sessions and conversation and then report back and really, once again, visioning for this.
Can I also add, I mean, the expansion team has been intentional in trying to engage our community, right? So I think even to the point of selecting particular providers who we felt would be more engaging, right? So I think, to Jeff's point, please, we're trying, we're asking, please come, and now's your chance to provide input. In 2 years, it will be too late, so.
In 6 months, it might be.
Yeah, I mean, the building will be done, we hope.
No. Okay, well, yeah, okay.
Something to add from the teacher's perspective, their approach was, tell us your dream, tell us what you want. And I was one of the first teachers to go because that's when I'm at prep, but as I talked to my colleague who had 5th hour prep, they're like, oh yeah, we're seeing this common thread, okay, this means this to the group so far. So they're really interpreting our dreams, but at the same time I felt like we were being set up for failure because we were expressing our dreams.
So, just to that though, when we did meet today, they said that we were very realistic. There's some things that we're probably not getting an Olympic pool, and somebody would love that, I'm sure, several would, but we're not, probably not, that's not in our budget, but that our staff they were really impressed with our staff.
And that's great feedback.
Ability to target what's the reality.
Yeah, because it really is more than just the building, so it's great feedback that you were able to share your thoughts.
Just a point of clarification, this might be getting ahead of it too. Is the thought, at least initially, conversation with Cunningham, to have a building that we can move into that still can be expanded and adding more students, or are we thinking that if it's here or another location, we just build it and then that's the size we jump to? And I guess that I say that just with the conversation that we had in my group, which was to maintain, and you referenced it too, to maintain that feel and the culture that is established at MSA, and not to lose that by just doubling the size.
Right. We have not had those specific conversations with them yet. Prior to working specifically with Cunningham and NTH, I mean, amongst ourselves and in the expansion committee, we've investigated many different options and what other schools have done. You know, Randy and Kate have visited schools and really looked at physical examples of what we might be looking for, but also asking them the question, how did you achieve that? And one of them, some answers are, we take a phased approach. Like St. Croix Prep, everyone's familiar with that school. That's what they did. They started with a particular building. They grew. They included different grades. They built another building. They built a field. A couple years later, now they built stands, but also an auditorium space. I know you've probably already looked at it because I heard it's phenomenal. But they did it in a phased approach, right? Part of it is because finances, they were very fortunate to have the property to expand on. So that's why when we, tell our commercial real estate broker, those are some of our dreams. It's like we want space that we can expand to if possible. Now we have to balance that against, is that going to meet our financial, target? We don't know. But yes, I mean, all that's on the table. It's started already, and it's going to continue on until we make that final decision, even to stay or leave.
And some of that too, our bond underwriters come in because we have to hit our enrollment targets. So there'll be enrollment targets that we will agree to going into in order, because they won't make us make the full payment the first year, but we're going to have basically 3 years to hit a certain enrollment in order to then be able to meet our bond covenants. So we're going to have to be thoughtful kind of about how we do it. And if we were to do a phased approach, it would almost be multiple projects. It wouldn't be. So.
One thing that might be nice, Randy and I were talking about is, we have our next 2 workshops are on the diversity, equity, inclusion, but maybe the very next one could be a nice one to go through the bonding process, just so we're all up to speed on how that works and what we're kind of signing up for. It's about that timing when we're going to have to decide, does go or not. The board, that is a board decision to spend, it'll probably be multiple millions, I won't say a number, but it's going to be big.
Tens.
It's going to be tens of millions, I didn't want to say it, but yes, it's tens of millions of dollars.
So. We have to be realistic about
Yeah,
that.
it is.
And even properties that Randy and Kate have visited, I mean, I don't want to scare anyone, but it's, it's more property than we currently have. And if we look at what people try to do with that, and we try to put ourselves in that position, it gives you a sense of where we might be at. So,
but just for some perspective, I saw in one of the financials, if you go back 10 years, we were 300 and some students, right? So now we're 6. So we've doubled in 10 years. So it's not unreasonable to say that we continue to double again.
Right.
I mean, it's just, unfortunately, it's just the numbers. That's how it works. We need the revenue, which is why we're asking for.
So maybe we do need to have a workshop on finance stuff, or at least the bond-related stuff in the near future. Oh, we just had one with Jenny Adams.
That's what
We're saying maybe December,
Yeah.
because we have kind of October, November planned out already with a lot of folks.
Yeah, well, because there's a lot to bonding that a layperson.
So other questions for Jeff, or not Jeff, or just in general on expansion, because I think it's important that you guys can understand what we've gone through, so you can catch up with.
And it's good to know we kind of chose well. There isn't a person that hasn't said, gosh, I wish we could just stay in this current location. Knowing that, we might be pressed for space, but the location. I mean, who would have thought after 25 years, we're in the center of the city, and this is it, and everyone wants this property, it just might not be the right size.
Is it possible to put something on our website for expansion, just to be a little more transparent and adapt?
Yeah, I
Working
mean, we're working on with Justin, is he still here? So this information that I do have a sheet with, you know, all my notes from just what I shared with you, but within probably a week or two, we'll be able to post something and start, sharing. That is one thing we have been missing, it's just taking some time to get the electronic version out.
What about, the website is great, I think, but what about like other channels, social, like, I don't know if we still doing Twitter?
So
or
when we've got a
Facebook.
combined document, I think that it would be useful to have a communication, maybe a pared down version of that.
For the daily announcement, for the emails.
Yeah, pared down is right, it's like 2.5 pages, single spaced, you know, with notes over the last 4.5, 5 months, so. We really want to show the big picture and the highlights.
Yeah.
So,
And being transparent about upcoming meetings too.
oh, yeah, you're right. Absolutely.
Can I move us to the next one? Is that okay? Yes. So then I have the board governance policy recommendation. So this is just a broad, I think, so some of the reason why we're working on this board governance and going through our policies, and we can talk about recommendations, is that was part of the investigation. There's a number of items called out in the investigation which said, hey, you know, the board is not operating either the way they should be, they don't understand, they need more training, or the policies are not correct, or the bylaws are not correct. So I think that's basically, and you guys saw, I think it was last month, we approved kind of a pared down version, you guys alluded to that, a pared down version of what that investigation said in a few paragraphs, and then our action items. So I think now would be a chance for you guys, if you have, the whole board, any questions on how we're going about doing this governance, you know, modifications, is there something else we should be doing that we're not doing, or we're not doing something right? Now is a great time to speak up on that, because I think in the coming few months, so the bylaws take realistically a few months to change. It takes a few months to change. So now is a good time if you want to speak up on how we're going about that procedure, or how should we be doing policies.
So did we decide to wrap policy with governance for now?
We had in the previous meeting. We can pull that apart.
Just
I think they're related. They are separate, but they're related. So back when we had, you know, a previous board, we were looking at a previous board member working through the governance. They were also going to take policy, but that doesn't mean that we have to continue to do it that way.
I'm wondering if policy could maybe be a subcommittee of governance, or I don't know if that's, because like sometimes you can have a meeting just on policy stuff.
I just don't think we have the people to be having subcommittees.
Yeah.
And I thought about a policy task force just specifically tasked with, because I find myself doing that in my head. Like, I want to make it really clear what we will work on, you know, aligning the bylaws with Statute 125, for example.
Well,
But it seems like things are, policy concerns are, if we're going to go through or I don't even want to call it a cleanup, but a revamp, it seems like there's just so much policy stuff that I don't know if a task force, and it is a committee, and there's so few of us right now that.
we used to have a committee that just did the policy updates.
Okay.
I mean, it's even like on our, was left over, this might be left over from, on our board committee updates, but,
Is that something that charter schools do, is have separate policy committees?
Some do, well, we didn't have a governance committee here before, so the previous school I was at had a governance committee, but our big thing is our bylaws. Once that's done, our governance committee did all the policies, so I guess it just depends, you know.
And maybe that's the way to think about it, is the bylaw question is right front and center, and then we have a kind of a, what would you call it, like a marching order of policy revisions.
Per month,
Yeah, each month I have a schedule that was handed down to me, and here's what you gotta do, so I just keep following that until somebody has a better idea, or we get a new policy that needs to be added in. But I think you have the skills, to, you know, to go through it takes a certain kind of person that can handle that and catch the changes, and that's not me. So I'm currently running it, but I'd be happy to have
Yeah, so
someone
then
else.
it's not proper for a task force because it's always going to be the next
It's-
policy
It
coming up,
is,
the next
it's not a
policy
task,
coming up.
it's ongoing.
And aligning that policy with our equity and inclusion goals.
Like a schedule, these are the policies we're looking this month, then it just rolls over every year.
So what are the benefits of separating governance and policy? Two separate committees?
Well, so, I know, like I said, it was, Michelle was, our board person that was doing that. Well, I guess, so policies are kind of how the board governs, so I suppose it does make sense to put them together. And did someone mention maybe there's things that shouldn't actually be in the bylaws, those should be in the policy?
Those could be separate policies.
So if we're taking things out of the bylaw and making the policy about that instead of it, so it's easier to change when the time comes, then it probably makes sense that they're the same the same group.
So keep it for now and revisit.
So I will schedule the next governance/policy meeting, and then maybe we could take it there and just say, where do we net out?
But there has been no past issue with having a policy committee.
No, I think it was more driven by the individual board member was fantastic at it, and they really enjoyed doing that, and we all benefited from that person going through because they were very good at it, and they did it. So I think, kind of like secretary, it's extra work for us to do, so you take somebody to kind of raise their hand and say, I will do that.
My impression of when the governance committee was put together was in response to the investigation, in the sense that the board messed up. The board was responsible for some of the actions that were held by the staff members, and so therefore governance was put in place to help monitor that behavior. So I think that out of that facet, they should be part of this policy. They should be reviewing policy and bringing it to the board through the governance to monitor how.
Correct. And
Who got the chance to meet.
hopefully I'm not misspeaking, because we are responsible for policy. The board is responsible for the policy, so we're not getting out of that. It's just a question of, do we have a separate policy? I think, because you're right, I mean, we have some changes that need to be implemented per the investigation and make sure that, one of them is training, so that we all understand what it is we're supposed to be doing. And the other one is if there's something not correct in our bylaws or policy, let's get those cleaned up as well. So that's the latter part is where I think, so the training is ongoing. It'll take us a number of months probably to go through some of that training. But how do we clean up our documents to make sure that that's also clear for us and the school? That's what the governance/policy committee needs to do.
So my question is, do we pause on any reviewing of policies right now until we get our bylaws straightened out? And then after that's done, we can go back to that chain of this policy comes next?
It's a good question. I think we currently say we will review them annually, which is why we've divided them up. So by not doing them each month, I think we just give ourselves 4 or 5 policies for December or something, which we can do as well.
I just put it out there as an option.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 6 of us right now
On the committee?
on the governance committee, so we try to tackle 2, 3 things, bring it to the board for consideration. Probably anything more than that is going to be prohibitive.
Yeah.
With,
We have to be
extension,
realistic
taking
too,
time.
right, but yeah.
But I think having the bylaws, that upper governance document kind of straighten out first should be our goal.
Does that make sense to everyone? So kind of from the board saying, governance committee, please help us with the bylaws, and then,
Right, and then if we can all just be mindful just to kind of police ourselves a little bit and make sure that having governance and policy together is going well.
sure, yeah.
Right, and we are such a small committee, so just, when it comes to the board to really take that time and go through that due diligence of really.
How much can students be involved in that process? Curious. Because it sounds like there wants to be a voice at that table, so is it possible for students?
And it's nice to hear that voice.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's nothing
Because-
stopping that.
Yeah, I mean, they're the ones who who,
That's why we're
whether
here.
we like it or not, can tell us when things are fair or not fair. And they can tell us when they are being included or excluded. So that is, I welcome that.
Currently,
I
our
learned so
bylaws
much from that.
only require the board and staff to approve. It'd be interesting to get some input from the students as well, right? It's not required currently that the students approve bylaw changes.
Oh, and I'm not,
But to have I agree, I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, it's kind of funny that one of the big constituents here don't even get excited.
I actually had as a note, I don't know if this is the right time to mention it, but would the students like to have a board member liaison? One of us to serve as kind of a bigger bring it forth voice for them.
One thing we do have is we have 4 town hall meetings now, and in the past, we had 1 or 2 board members attend, which at least in my experience was good.
Next Monday, the 26th.
So that's kind of nice if we rotate around our board, raise your hand. So solicit names if you can, so we can.
So at least 2 members, not more.
Yeah, no more than a couple. Would be great. And I think I thought it was well received by the students. I'm not sure if you were in the one that I was at, but yeah, okay, good.
I can maybe come to some of them. What were the dates for those?
First one's next Monday, the 26th. 4:30 to 5:30.
I think the dates are in your update, except for the one in March, back one week.
But it worked out well last
I
year.
know it's somewhere in
Andy.
the packet, but I just,
If you could send an email out to the board and just say, here's the dates, please sign up, or do a doodle poll,
It's in my executive director's report.
or if you want to do it
So
that way.
next Monday.
The March one needs to change because it was on, yeah.
I think
I
it's
can't do the one
okay
next Monday, but.
if we do it over email. I'm just saying, because then we can see who signs up for which ones, and we can
Okay.
see, or however,
I'll send it up.
something like that, might be nice to organize it, then we can see the openings and see if we can make it. And sign up. Instead of us all hitting you with separate emails, it may all be the same day.
And we can start sharing the committee dates with our student representatives.
Yeah, the
They like to
governance.
log in. Mhm.
Yep,
They
yep.
can log in and.
And it's been pretty flexible now. We try to meet once a month. I think we've had 1 or maybe a meeting before you maybe had 2 meetings, so that's it. But it would be nice if we can get it on the calendar as a regular time and whatnot. Okay, other questions, governance policy?
So for next steps, would you agree that we should look for kind of our full-time chair for that, not you, because you have other duties and also being chair? And then we just have to increase the number of volunteers for that committee.
I think that would be nice, so anyone listening, you're welcome to attend and help us out here. I think it's a great opportunity. So, yes. Sorry, forget you.
No.
2 points?
Nope, just those
Potential
2
chair.
points. Because right now, I mean, I.
Oh, I remember what I was gonna say. So next time, I think Heddle's got quite a few documents
Yeah.
that we
Oh,
can share
that
to
too.
the group.
I will send it out.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then we can,
Then everybody.
get a good chance to look through those, and then we can come prepared to have a discussion about what we like, don't like. So, okay, great. Thank you.
So I do have a
Yeah.
comment here, and the whole reason why it's put on there is, it's been brought to the attention of people that if we as a board are supposed to be making informed decisions, why have new board members not been given the report to read?
I think all the board is able to get the report.
The redacted, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was never communicated, and then there's also, I saw in the report that was put out that board members are supposed to complete a training.
Yes.
Where is the information on that? I mean, I just feel like there's a lot of missing pieces.
Well, this was, we had one training today.
But there is a Minnesota requirement that 100, 200, 300. Two class.
Other second ones, right.
Yeah, yeah. So that one,
Do we
Randy
have,
can,
actually, Randy, kind of tied to that too, is can you make sure, do we get like credentials to sign in for MSPA access and Max as board members? How does that work? I can't remember, in terms of our membership.
I had someone look into MSBA, I'll follow up with her on that.
Okay, and the reason I
I don't know if we
ask
can do
is
it individually.
they provide our training. So if we can get those logins and whatnot, then you'll be able to see, in fact, they offer a lot in the next 2 months because everyone
changing
Because
lawyers.
that'd be good to know so I can start planning
Yes.
to
Yes.
work on time for that.
I'd also,
It's gonna-
I've done my finance one, but it's been 2 years, so I'd like to do another one.
And they used to hold up
Jenny, the one I think
in
last year,
person.
or 2 years.
But I think they're all.
But there's also required training, so we all have a fiduciary responsibility, and one of the things in the state of Minnesota is that means that we need to know what it is we're supposed to be doing. So then we say, we've gone to these, I think it's 3 classes. And there was a time when you could do it remotely, I think they're probably back to person again. But in the past, let's work together, because in the past, our previous director helped us keep those arranged. I never helped arrange them, but it would be nice to get that out to everyone. And you made mention of it in the annual report, which trainings we had on that. But there are 3 that are required.
So we're each responsible to ensure our own compliance? Is that kind of how we?
You're responsible for the training. I think you're given a year. I think you're given a year to do the training.
Okay.
And it's a couple hours, if I remember. It wasn't bad, and that was very informative.
The school pays for it.
Yeah.
We just have to do it.
Well, and
Yeah.
like when I joined the board, the executive director helped me facilitate it, so.
Yeah, that's why I'm looking to you, Andy, because I never said any yet. They never said it for me. But if that's something that the chair should do, then let me know.
So you'll tell us where we
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, I can send you the email from MSA, you don't send it.
Good question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Or for open discussion. What has been the feedback on the summary that was sent to families, the summary of the investigation report? Have we received any feedback? Any
I've
inquiries?
gotten no emails from what we sent out.
I just heard a couple comments, I would say from parents. I would say I have seen some information requests that came after
Yep.
that.
Yep,
So-
we had some requests for the redacted version, I think 2 parents had asked for that.
Yeah, so,
And Emma's her whole computer crashed and everything's gone, so she had to redo the whole redacted 3 times. That's why they're not going in Howard Times. She just told me today. I thought they were sent, but Justin was working on her computer today. She lost everything. She's done 3 times now, so she has to redo it all. So she started the redacted version. But any board member that wants the whole report needs to set up a time with her, and they can read it in their office. Yeah, and then you've got the sign up form. Yeah, you just can't take it with you.
so I think one of the things that's not kind of fair, if you will, to the new board members is we've been talking, for over a year now, year and a half, together in many closed sessions and discussions with the different lawyers and authorizers and whatnot. So the procedure that we ended up finally authorizing at our last board meeting of sending out that summary came from all of those discussions. Because there was many options, how, we say nothing, as an option. Do we have a redacted report go out? An option. Do we have a summary go out? Summary with action items, all those different things, pros and cons were discussed. We decided on that path. Was it perfect? Maybe not. But we tried to err towards sharing as much as we could or felt it was possible. There is data privacy, so a number of things actually couldn't be shared, and a number of things doesn't make sense to share. So, but everything that we can share and are able to share, basically whatever we're able to share, we wanted to share, and then the rest of it, the board needs to understand, because some of that is going to be used for our going forward, right? So I think there are some specific things for the administration, specific things for the board and for the school, specific things for teachers and for students. All of those things were handled kind of differently.
My other question is, and I'm just wondering, was the summary decided in a closed meeting type setting, or was it actually voted on? It wasn't.
It was
What
live.
month was that?
For the
Well,
summary.
we talked about it last month. I think last month is when we finally approved to release it.
August.
Yeah, I remember that. When was it approved that would be the avenue that would be selected?
Oh, that would have been an earlier,
July.
yeah, I'm not sure, a month or 2 before that maybe.
Okay.
It
So,
was at an open board meeting, that wasn't during a closed session.
Yeah, that's where we decided to go that route. That actual document took a month or 2 to kind of boil down and get vetted by lawyers and whatnot. So-
Authorizer also.
And the authorizer. So that's why we finally approved it for release last month.
okay, so as to the redacted report, any stakeholder who wants to review it just makes a request for it.
And now we charge $25. but I'm joking, but it's interesting to know because, I mean, when people ask for stuff, I think in the past we've always given it away for free. I'm not saying we changed that, but I think it is nice. It might be nice as we talk about policies to think about putting a little bit of something on there, not to hide information, but just to let people know, like if a reporter comes and says, I want everything that you have on all this stuff, it may take our administration, a week to do all that work where they can't now help our school, so send them a bill for $2,000 or whatever it is, right?
Well, and couldn't that go into effect June, July, you know what I mean? We could vote on something that after a certain time period, because we haven't done it before, or it starts next school year or something.
So, and I understand the point, we talked at the workshop that we don't want to penalize any particular
Right.
group, and we're not trying to do that, but we also want to be fair to our administration and their
Yes.
time of providing this sort of information. Make it cost a little bit. What I find in my professional exam, if you give people free stuff, they want it all, right? Whereas if you put a small charge, all of a sudden they get a little more picky about what they want, right? So I think that's also fair. So, but I'm not
That's a
advocating
policy?
it. It's a policy discussion.
It's a policy
Yeah,
for
yeah.
drafting a consideration.
Yeah.
Which stakeholders are able to like request the adapted version of the investigation?
So I have seen, and I think,
I was told that students were able to, and I was like confused because of like parents and literally everybody except the students were, which are like the primary like stakeholders that were affected by it.
Yeah, great question. I think, Randy, I think that was a legal opinion that came back to us that the students, is that right?
Yeah, that came from our legal, that students should have get a copy of the report.
Was there a reason?
You know,
I did not see the reason, but then sometimes that's the way the lawyers work too, is we ask a question and they come back with a legal answer.
and sometimes these investigations, not just this one in particular, but all of them are sensitive, right? And you are all just mature beyond your years. But developmentally, sometimes when you read certain things, it can become misplaced in your heads and your hearts. And so if you have a trusting adult, like your parents, obtain a copy of that report, then it gives you somebody to go to for guidance when you ask the questions that you are naturally going to ask when you read such things. You can say, hey mom, hey dad, what does this mean? And so you're not left just kind of floating out there with all this stuff. Does that make sense?
It does, but when you said sensitive material, like the redacted version is like, it's just.
I think I think all feelings are sensitive, right? School and education is a sensitive thing. Growing up is a sensitive thing. So the issues that we talk about here are sensitive things, whether they're financial, whether they're academic, whether they're policy. So those reports are sensitive as well. So I think if you read them with somebody who can give you some guidance on them, maybe Mrs. Bergrad can kind of explain, like literature, right?
Yes.
Certain literature, it's just so great to have a teacher because some literature is very sensitive.
Well, and you get more out of that conversation, right? And just because you have a place to share your thoughts and ideas in an environment, hopefully, that is thoughtful of what you're saying and how you feel.
Are you suggesting that students request that their parents request the investigation?
I think it's something you should probably discuss with your parents, whether they want you to read that.
That just led me on to know that, like, well, students that want to have access to it, they might have, they might not have like the equal opportunity to as like other students where the parents like say no. Or
I know I have thought about that, but at the end of the day, I think it does have to come from a guardian, a parent. Because like all of these issues, even more so than these issues, these are protected issues. And they are sensitive issues, and they deserve to be brought forth to you kids in a supportive light.
So I think we've tried since I think April of this year, thereabouts, something like that, since we got our report and working through it. you saw, our director had the purple, bullet point items and objectives, so those all came from.
They're on the website.
They're on the website as well. So there's not a lot left that hasn't been shared, other than the private information or the protected information. So that's why we are personally, or we are not personally, we as a school have been advised that that's needs to be kept protected. But all those action items, we've tried to be extremely open about, here's what we did wrong, here's what we're doing about it, so all of that stuff is there. Because, that's fantastic that we got feedback from students that, hey, something's not right here. Because the worst would be, we just carried on not knowing that something was not right. So I think that was the first thing, confirmed, we got some information, and some of the stuff that was concerned about, looks like we were doing, not correct. So let's fix that, right? Because we're all here to make this school a better place. Okay?
No, can I give a recommendation? Maybe take the executive director's annual goals to your meeting and have a discussion there about those. That would be the next step.
Right, and we plan to revisit the petition we've sent to or
Yeah, good idea. Please do. Because they came at about the same time, but they actually were separate, right? But they got intermingled. So if there's something that we missed, please bring it back again, and let's see if we're not doing something on something important. Let's do it. Okay? Thank you. Any other general questions, procedures, governance, policy, or just general board questions? Good discussion, everyone. The last one we had, if you guys are able to in this section, is the voting that we did. We added an item E, which was from the previous 14B.I on how we voted last time. So maybe we'll start with you, Ben.
Sure. The issue that I have with this is I feel that it contradicts, the vote that was held in August contradicts what was approved in July and what the leadership guidelines that are set forth by boards are. There's conflict of interest with the fact that this was brought up again by individuals who were not present or voted against. So I think that's a conflict of ethics. And I feel that the action that's taken by this is setting a precedence when we have the opportunity right now to edit our bylaws to reflect moving forward in this issue. The example, I guess, that was given was about Adam Bartz, and he was appointed after a seat was not filled. Is that correct by me saying that?
The position had been filled and that person stepped down.
And
so it was
prior to being seated, because that was the old argument.
No,
discussion.
it was after being seated. That was the example that was given in that.
So there's no real
Nope.
black and white
Exactly.
stating this is how we should move forward.
Exactly.
So that's why I'm saying I think we need to redact that from the previous meeting and move forward by editing our bylaws to reflect something that will help in this situation in the future.
So since I was the person that brought it up, I voted no in, was it June? Because I felt that we didn't have time and did not look at the bylaws before we even took the vote. So I voted no, and I brought that up during the meeting. I continued to pursue it because I felt we actually made a decision that went against our bylaws. So it wasn't a personal, I didn't like the outcome. We had to look at the bylaws and correct, if that were the case, what we didn't do correctly in June. That was the reason.
So the motion should have been to reflect on the bylaws prior to moving.
No, the motion, no, not really. I'm not sure I understand that motion.
What I mean is it should have been put to discussion and then a decision on the next meeting after reviewing the bylaws.
Well, I mean, if you want to go back and change more elegant motion, maybe to revisit the motion we made in June as being, incorrect or a violation of what was written in the bylaws. So I don't know if it changes the outcome. I mean, we actually have to be careful on how we handle this issue. I think if we revisit it so we better understand it, absolutely. I'm not sure the mechanism, because like for instance, if we vote to rescind, voting to rescind the July motion would mean you're not seated. Voting to reconsider usually happens during the actual meeting that the original motion was made, so I'm not sure that's appropriate. I think we should figure it out and have that discussion. I don't know what that mechanism is right now.
Well, I think we do need to, we found ourselves in a situation that the bylaws maybe aren't the clearest on. So if we are talking about revising the bylaws, I think we either need to either have that in the bylaws or a policy that support the bylaws.
Well, I mean, my view is, it is clear. We don't like the result. I get that. But if you were to follow the letter of the bylaws, it should have been put out for open election. And I think it was a nice compromise to wait until the next election period to revisit it and go through that, rather than let's do an election like right now. And it's kind of disruptive and it takes time. So, me personally, I thought that was a good kind of middle ground to make sure that we continue on with the process. We would be on the board and for this term at a minimum, that we have the election like we normally would, which would be in the spring.
So it would probably be, so when our bylaws don't speak to an issue, our bylaws state that we will follow Robert's Rules of Order revised. So the matter's closed, it's done, minutes have been reported, so we're probably looking at section 35 of Robert's Rules to amend something previously adopted. To go back and change the wording of the motion itself. Right? Does that capture? We're not changing.
What motion? Do you go back to July or do we go back to
I
August?
think where you missed was July, it was approved,
Yes.
right? July was approved, but then August it was
Misstated.
pulled back and then changed. And then-
Oh, okay, so it
and
wasn't
then
just a
voted it
misstatement
differently.
in August. It was an error.
I guess it would depend on who you ask. I think if I look at it, it goes back even a month before that where we were having a lot of turmoil with the board. People were resigning, some people were quitting the school or all this different. So we had a number of board member pieces moving. We had people leave for different reasons, unrelated to any of this. So I think we were at a loss on that first discussion on what are we going to do? So we took a pause and we were going to have the governance committee actually at that time come back to us with a recommendation on what's the right way to do it. The governance committee dissolved because that board member left. So then we had another month delay. And at that time we had a recommendation with 3 people saying they're willing to help out. So we're like, yes, let's go, let's do it. And then we had, this is my recollection, then we had a further interpretation of the bylaws saying what we did in the previous meeting was incorrect, and here's why. And the board said, that looks like, the board voted at that time and said, it looks like that was incorrect. Let's do an interim, and because the board has to call for an election, and we only have a specific time when we call for elections, and we don't have an elected officer. So that we are left with nobody, so we have 8 people on the board, and we run with that until the next election, or we elect an interim one for the period until the next election, and that's what we voted on and decided. So now the question is, did we do that wrong? Maybe, but I think the question for us is, I'm happy to have a full board, I like that. I just feel like in order for us to follow the bylaws as we interpreted them last meeting, that means that we have to have an election for that last bit, instead of a full 3 years. That's how I interpreted it and why I changed my vote. Because my vote was initially, I will take a volunteer, a teacher wants to help, we have a teacher position, let's do it. That was incorrect reading on my part of how we could fill a seat. Because we've had a few different examples of people coming and going with, everyone is different. And Cody, to your question, this is my own personal opinion, I feel like spelling out every scenario in bylaws will be carried on for the next 20 years. Because we have not done it yet, and we have changed it 15 times in 20 some years. Next year there will be another one. Well, we never thought of that, right? So I feel like we almost need to have some general, like state approved or whatever line says, here's how you do elections, here's how you seat people. The rest of it is the board decides. And I think you brought it up before, Ella, the board, we're all supposed to be competent in managing things. We're gonna have a unique situation, we're gonna have 9 people, and then we get to vote majority rules. So,
And the hard part about a public board is, once that motion passes or once that motion fails, you almost have to reintroduce it again. You have to open up the issue, get it to be opened up by whatever it is, 2/3 majority it takes to reopen an issue? Or does it take unanimity? I don't even know. So if we have errors that are made, how do you go back and change that? Because I also feel that compulsion to keep, proper records, right? So what is that procedural avenue to go back? Do we just concede in the minutes that a mistake was made?
can we, just a suggestion, could we take that one in the governance policy one as well, just to say how, because Robert's Rules Book is quite big, and I'll admit I don't know all of it,
Yes,
so.
and so I think if we have like a summary for ourselves on what the proper objections are,
Yeah.
when they should be stated, and when to concede and how to correct errors, because it is important, and it's partially the reason why I wanted to make sure that I got my vote changed, because, it undermines our governance when those errors happen.
Well, and so specifically, we're talking kind of about election stuff, so does the clarification belong in the bylaws? Does it belong in,
Well,
the
we need to
election
clarify our
policy?
minutes.
Well, I mean, like, if
The errors need to be fixed
that
in the minutes, I
we've
think.
come into situations that we probably should document some kind of procedure on, some of these different scenarios. So does that belong in the bylaws themselves, or does it belong as part of the election policy or another policy, or which is the best avenue? Do we want, if we just keep adding stuff to the bylaws, we're going to get like a 10-page bylaw, and so.
I think that there lies the issue, is the reason why the board got in a lot of trouble with the investigation was self-interpretation of policies and interpretation of bylaws. And so I think there needs to be some clarification.
Yeah.
So you're disputing the interpretation of the bylaw in terms of election?
Well, and the fact that there really wasn't sustainable evidence to support the theory.
Well, there was. I talked about it last month. I thought it was pretty solid, but I mean, if you have a dispute about that, I'd love to hear, so that we can come to some understanding on what is it that I misinterpreted about the bylaws.
But I think part of it comes from, in the bylaws, it does state in the instance of a community member stepping down after, say, winning a write-in position. So if there's language there, then why isn't there language in regards to teachers? Because all teachers are running willingly on the board, so how come there isn't? In the case that the elected person wins, it then goes to the second seat.
Okay, I'm not quite sure I understood that, but I mean, that would be speculating why something isn't written into the bylaw. That's not an interpretation of what's written in the bylaws. I mean, it could have been written many different ways. I would agree with that. In our political system, I would agree that, there's some circumstances that you would take the second person, right, with the number of votes. But in our political system, that has to be disclosed before the vote. You can't do it later thinking it would be the most expeditious way to fill a position. So we could, if we wanted to change that, do that, because in the future, there might be a better way. I agree with that. That's great that we could have that conversation. Unfortunately, in this scenario, we can't undo that, because the vote already happened.
I understand that. So that approach is moving forward. I think we need to revisit that in the bylaws. And I think that's going to now change the agenda for a decision.
Well, maybe, just a suggestion, maybe we could have you attend if you're able, or provide some thoughts that we could discuss at the governance.
Yeah, I have it written down too.
Is that right? Okay. That's good. Any further comments, questions, discussion? Are you guys, do you need a quick power break?
So
Or
just wanna make sure
decision,
you
or
do
do you
that.
want to just power through those? We have 3 items.
Some of these issues.
The rest of it goes quick. I think it can be quick. All right.
And, well, first one's the annual report, we already discussed it.
I'll make a motion to approve it. Can I get a second? Wendell seconded it.
Motion to approve
The
it, or
annual-
motion to approve it with the.
Oh, with amendments, with
With the date.
minor date corrections. You had a date correction as well?
Couple date corrections.
Okay. Thank you. So I make a motion to approve with some minor date corrections. Is it okay? Seconded? All those in favor? Right, any discussion? Yeah, okay. All those in favor, say aye. Opposed? Abstain? I was getting hot there for a little bit. You guys, also just me.
Conflict of interest is I passed these around, you already signed them, I just need Jeff's and I have them all. So that's a form I gave you. So yep, that just basically says that you're not making any, you don't have any interest in any of our vendors, so. And then the last thing, maybe I looked at it, the wrong policy got put on the board packet. So we can't approve it. And we had the red line version with those two changes.
Yep.
And this isn't the right one, so we can't, we'll have to put that on next one.
Which one?
The never-ending election.
The election one, but at least we don't have to worry about elections
Oh,
till the
okay.
spring.
Yes.
Okay.
But the wrong one was thrown on there, it doesn't have the right changes, so I don't want you to
Okay.
approve that
Okay.
because it's not the
Okay.
right one. So that's it.
When we do the changes, are we also gonna have the comments about letters, mailing letters? Or is this really all it's, because there was some.
There was,
It's, we took all that out.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
we just, yeah, it's,
Because
this is just.
it's too old,
this
all right.
was
Yeah.
the wrong one.
Yeah.
This one looked like it required letters. I don't think it
Yeah,
should be
we
that.
changed it.
All right, all right.
I don't
Good.
know how that one got up there.
Then,
Sorry.
Just a, again, clarification.
yeah,
So the conflict of interest, you just need additional
You're just saying
sheets.
this,
Yep,
that's it.
we're not voting on anything.
that's not a vote. And the second one is a delayed
Table-
vote until
table till next month.
Table till next month.
Yeah.
Do we have a motion on table?
Yeah, let's do that just to be, so I can make a motion to table that till next month.
I will second.
Maggie seconds, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Great. So passes, we will take that one next month. Future board items, so we do have a financial audit coming up, Cody, I think in the next couple of months.
So we are starting the audit in October. I believe last year's audit was presented in December, but that audit started sooner, so I don't know if we will have it by December, but probably January.
No, it has to be to MDE by December 30th. So I think it's gonna be in the November board meeting or December at the latest.
Okay.
And then, as already mentioned, we'll do some diversity, equity, inclusion training in our October, November workshops already arranged with Paula, so please make sure you guys, I mean, come anyways, but make sure you attend the workshop. You guys are welcome to sit in, but not required on the workshop, I think, if you want to learn a little bit more. It's part of coming right out of the investigation in terms of making sure the board is trained on these Yeah, she's really good, yeah, so you guys would benefit. Now, I know she did staff, does she also do students or no? Has she done any student training? No, okay. So, think about it in the next couple of times, because I know it's extra time. Plus, quick plus minus, what worked, what didn't tonight?
Having the kids here.
Yes.
Having the students here.
Yeah.
I like that there are two as well, because I think it helps just having somebody else to throw stuff off of or remind you of things.
Collaborate.
Yeah.
What else?
Take a moment to change of my plus.
Yeah,
It's been in the past that some statements were made about me in regards to other board members, past board members, and a lot of my intent has been questioned by a number of people that I feel have been coming at me, but I'd like for you to just reflect on where I stand right now and who I am, and actually seeking the other side of those stories, and know that what was put out about me is not who I am. And I think that as an adult, we can look at that on both sides. So turning that into a plus.
thanks for sharing, yeah. I'm real encouraged for the diversity of kind of thought and everything, and the numbers of folks that we have here, so I think compared to running the board with 5 or 6 members was a struggle, right? So I know you're saying we're a small one, but we've doubled in size almost since previous months, so this is great for me. Thanks for hanging in there, guys. I'm surprised you didn't ask for a break in the middle, but we powered through, so we'll be done early. Any other
No, I
comments?
do have one more
Yeah.
comment, maybe just to give the kids some resolution. The gentleman, the attorney who was here giving us during the workshop, you might be able to answer their question with some specificity as to, because they might not be eligible to get that. I mean, I can give the mom perspective, but.
We specifically asked that
We
company.
sent it to our attorney.
Same company.
Oh, okay, and I was going to say that if the reason is, if you can, the resolution for the kids might be to know that because they are minors, maybe they're not eligible for that information under the Data Practices Act of Minnesota. Just a good, clean answer for them, because they are minors. And if if children who are not minors, between that 18 and don't fall between that 18 and 26, they are eligible to request that information, and we can also let them know too.
Yeah, but the dependent thing.
Right.
Yeah,
So
if
depending
they're
on the
claimed as a
situation.
dependent,
Well,
then they're still a
from my
minor.
understanding, so if you're 18 and you're a dependent, you can still request that data yourself. 'Cause you're an adult.
Well, this
It's your
isn't-
parents
but
can
this-
get data on you.
But that's data on you.
Yeah, that's data on you. The kids want a copy of the investigation.
That's different.
So why
So that would be a good
children
question
make
for the
public
law.
So they're making a public records request. Can a minor make a public records request?
Anything else?
Another plus, we have a full board and, full, because we got our students too, but that seems, we had a little trouble setting up the room, just didn't know how, we'd gotten so small that, but I think we're.
Is this space working okay for you guys?
I like the shape.
You like the shape?
Yeah, I think it made for good conversation
Good.
to hear and see all points of view.
We'll have to see if there's anyone out there watching, if you're able to hear. We have just the one mic, so if you are having trouble hearing. Did you hear that?
People are having trouble hearing when people speak, so maybe a microphone.
People
We
here.
got brand new mics, area mics that can be put up and around, so.
We might need that.
Yep.
They're
We
coming.
just got them, so. We have to learn how to use them first. If you could help put the tables up, that would be great. We have middle school's first hour, so.
Let's do that. So I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn at 8:47 PM.
I'll second.
Maggie seconds. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion passes. Well done, Ann. Thank you.
You want the chairs?
I guess we'll get to that answer.